Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is an everlasting flame in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 10, Chromatic Star Hopes United. Petra McNeary was not one who was usually this focused. She had lost her purpose recently, she felt. It was difficult to say that she knew what she wanted to do or even what she was fighting for when fighting for the kingdom. When she heard that Lady Edelgard was back, she felt ecstatic. She could prove her loyalty by fighting for her once more. And then, they had arrived at Ailel, and now, she was finally fighting against Count Bergliez. It would not be far-fetched to say that it was her life's mission to kill this man. He had killed her father and was one of the reasons Brigid was a vassal state to the Empire. She did not resent Lady Edelgard for this, but there was still a burning sting deep within at all times. Her people would not be free. She would not be the reason for their happiness. But for now, she would be content with removing the head of the man before her. Count Bergliez had arrived with others. She ignored them, striking directly for the man himself, and as steel met steel, there was a resounding silence over the clearing. Petra. A small, confused voice reached her ears. Caspar. It is good to be seeing you. Please do not be interrupting me. Bergliez sneered. I recognize you. You're that Brigid girl, aren't you? Come back to take revenge? Caspar spoke up, suddenly sounding much less confused and much more angry. Wait, hold on, what's going on? Petra, why do you need to take revenge on my dad? Petra disengaged for a moment, slicing forwards with much quickness. Her thin swords twirled around Bergliez's gauntlets, the steel screeching against sacred metal. Bergliez grunted as she quickened her assault, a hail of attacks raining down upon the much older man. Her mouth was set in a thin line. I killed her father, boy, and if you don't want her to do the same to yours, then help keep her off of me. Bergliez ordered. Petra could not spare any thoughts for her battalion. It would take all her concentration to kill the monster before her. And then, from behind, a yawn came forth. Oh, I don't think he'll be doing any of that. Come on, Caspar, let's go. Petra's grin turned smug. My thanks, Linhard. Bergliez looked very displeased, much to her pleasure. Waldemar's boy. You're really going to turn your back on the Empire like this? Linhard was unperturbed even as Petra's assault intensified. I may have turned my back on the Empire, but you're the one who turned your back on your Emperor. Which one is worse? Well, I don't care about anything like that anyways. Hey, hold on, Linhard, I'm not gonna abandon my dad like this. I can't just let you kill him like this, Petra. From behind, a gauntleted fist raced towards her, only for Linhard's hand to clamp down on Caspar's shoulder and warp him away. Petra paused, disengaging for a moment. I must thank you once again, Linhard. May the spirits be with you. Linhard yawned. Ugh, I have to deal with so many bothersome things today. Well, you're welcome. May the spirits be with you too, or whatever. I'll go deal with Caspar. You should make this count. Petra grimly nodded, and Linhard ran out of the stronghold. Bergliez stood up to full, a heavy frown on his face. I understand if you hate me, but you should also understand that orders are orders. I didn't do what I did out of malice. That does not absolve the death of my father, or my countrymen. All deeds cannot go unpunished. You are the reason that I was forced from my home as a hostage, forced to learn a new language and meet a new people, and you must accept the consequences of that decision. Bergliez groaned. Who cares about that? You went from being the princess of some backwater nation to being one of the strongest commanders in the Empire. You were accepted, cared for, taught, and fed. We treated you far better than most ever would, and this is how you treat us in return. White-hot rage filled Petra. If you cannot understand my anger, then perhaps you will understand after I send you from a family that you love to the eternal flames. Perhaps there, you may finally be accepted. Bergliez's grim look only intensified, and Petra moved in. Her sword moved quicker than lightning, and her body was cloaked in wind as she dashed around her enemy. Bergliez was slower than her, and although his fists were powerful, it meant nothing if those fists could not hit her. Again and again she slashed out, the winds around her a tempest as she forced her enemy back. If you are having any regrets, let it be that you created your own death. Petra snarled, breaking through his guard. Burgles grunted as he was sent skidding backwards, his feet planted firmly onto the ground. Throwing knives followed up that action, and Burgles barely managed to get his fists up in time to block most of them. What he failed to block, however, was the knife that stuck out of his leg. His frown was heavy as Petra moved in once more, slicing once, twice, thrice, and a fourth time around him, the wind howling. 2 of those strikes caught skin. She retreated, pulling out her trusted bow and flipping upwards, her arrow infused with wind. I will remove you. The arrow slammed into the ground near Burgles, exploding outwards into a burst of wind. Burgles failed to block it. He tumbled to the ground, breathing heavily, and Petra landed. Her ferocious snarl had settled into something now perturbed. You are having much weakness. Why are you not stronger? I was told you were the best. Burgles slowly pulled himself up. Maybe you're just good, kid. You're almost as fast as Holst, and that's really saying something, especially when he's only quick as lightning most of the time. I will not be receiving your compliments. Stand up and fight. I will cut you down at your best. Her eyebrows were drawn in a tight line, and her body burned with an electric energy. Never before had she been so incensed to fight. Burgles huffed. Don't regret that decision later, you hear? I'm coming at you now. And then, he rushed forwards, and Petra found herself on the back foot. And yet, despite his ferocious attacks, she never found herself sweating. When it came to speed, Felix was far superior. He had weaved through her attacks with grace and agility, dashing across her strikes with little more than glancing blows to his armor and growing in quickness every time. Although Burgles was fast, he would not be able to keep up with him. And when it came to dexterity, his deftness was not matched by Ash, whom she had spent several long nights hunting with, and who could launch arrows with incredible skill. He wasn't someone to underestimate, but she felt pride surge up within her at the thought that her training, her bonds with friends, had paid off in the end. His gauntlets raced towards her head, and Petra gripped her blade tightly. At just the right moment, her blade dashed upwards and blocked the blow, and between the two of them, a burst of wind erupted, knocking Burgles off of his feet. She exhaled as Burgles struggled to recover once more. His feet did not have much purchase beneath them, she noticed. With one more burst, one more set of rapid attacks, Burgles fell once more, and this time, he did not attempt to get back up. His body bled in multiple places. Wind had scraped flesh from bone, and her sword had overwhelmed his body's resilience. His face would now likely have an ugly scar running down it. All in all, she had won. Certainly, without a shadow of a doubt, won. Still, she did not feel any better. Despite that, it was far too late to stop now. She raised her blade, preparing to strike. Petra, came a voice from behind. She did not lower her blade, but she did pause. King Dimitri. It is good to be seeing you again. I have defeated Count Burgles. I can see that. Were you planning on killing him, even though he is already down? He asked, and although the words themselves may have seemed accusatory, his tone was anything but. It seemed as though he was merely curious. Petra turned her attention down to the heavily breathing man. Yes. He killed my father, and so I will kill him in turn. Will you stop me? No, I will not. However, all I ask is that you consider the consequences of your actions. Revenge is not something that is easily repaid. It consumes you, drives your thoughts from you, forces you onto its path and allows no substitutes, and it is almost always repaid in kind. One man's actions will spurn another's, and the cycle of pain will only continue. Call me a hypocrite if you wish, but putting down my blade and forgiving my enemies is not something that I could ever accomplish. But you are far stronger in character than I could ever hope to be, and that is why I ask that you consider it if not for yourself, then for Caspar, who will be hurt by your actions. She grit her teeth, pressing the tip of her sword closer to Count Burgles' neck. He swallowed, and a thin line of blood came out from his neck due to the proximity. I will not be forgetting my grudge so easily, she argued. Dimitri continued. I'm not asking you to. If you want, then kill him, but you must be prepared to bear the weight of that grudge. It will always come back to haunt you. Her brow furrowed as she thought. Lady Edelgard was exceptionally kind, but in a situation like this, would she tell her to choose, or would she try to guide her to what she thought was the correct choice for her? Petra grit her teeth. In a situation like this Dmitri spoke once more, his voice careful. Petra, in a situation like this, if you can't decide what to do, then you should just listen to your heart. Listen to her heart? The only thing her heart could remember was the pain after losing her father, the long, hollow nights she spent crying, wishing it was all a bad dream, that he would be back the next day and scoop her into his arms and tell her it was all a joke. The only thing her heart could remember was the fear and absolute confusion when she was taken from her home and brought to a strange place where she did not speak their language and was forced into their conflicts time and time again. The only thing she could remember was time spent with her friends, time spent with Caspar and his kind heart. He would never survive that, she realized. His heart did not have the capacity for that hatred. It would bubble up and overflow, and she would not be able to stop him when it did. They would forever be distant if she shoved this blade into the heart of his father. Petra sighed, and slammed the pommel of her blade into Burgley's temple. The man grunted, his eyes rolling back into his head as he slumped over, unconscious. Satisfied, she stood up and turned to Dmitri. There. I chose to not be killing him. He gave her a soft smile, stress burned into his face. I'm proud of you. Not many people would be able to make that choice. I doubt I could. She turned her head back to Burgley's. I am not so sure I was making the right choice. I do not want to regret it. But, I do not want to regret killing him, either. Perhaps the spirits are angry at me. Perhaps my father is, too. But, in the end, the words didn't come. Dmitri just shook his head. You don't have to speak anymore. I understand. Come, this battle is not won yet. There is still more for us to do, and Petra. Lady Edelgard's voice rang out from behind, and Petra turned to greet her. Ah, Lady Edelgard, it is good to be seeing you. The same goes to you, Hubert, and to you, Ferdinand. I was missing the two of you very much. It's mutual, my dear Petra. It's just unfortunate that it had to happen like this. Ferdinand's voice was chipper. Likewise. Is he dead? Hubert asked, inclining his head towards Burgley's, who was currently completely motionless on the ground. Edelgard groaned. Petra, I understand that you wanted to take your revenge, but Count Burgley's is I did not kill him, Petra refuted, just hit him very hard. He will survive. Edelgard blinked, apparently very taken aback. Petra understood her very well. She had not expected to spare him either. I see. Well done, Petra. We can bring him over to our side now. You did well. Edelgard's voice betrayed how caught off guard she was. I am not the one to be praising, Lady Edelgard. It was King Dmitri who convinced me to spare him. She mentioned offhandedly, and Edelgard turned to the man as though she was just now seeing him for the first time. Hubert chuckled. Perhaps you are every bit the fool you are made out to be, Dmitri. If you knew what was good for you, you would have allowed her to kill him and save you some grief in the future. Dmitri merely shook his head. I may not be the wisest at telling what is good for me, but I know that she would regret it if she killed him here. It was her decision to make, and all I did was allow her to see it as a decision instead of a fixed outcome. That aside, it is good to see that you are well, Edelgard. Edelgard refused to meet his eyes, staring ahead resolutely. Where is Emperor Agir? Already fled. He left behind Count Burgley's to cover his escape. With the Death Knight and Burgley's defeated, the only commander left on the battlefield is Caspar. Dmitri responded after a moment. Edelgard hummed. Caspar, it'll be good to see him again. And where is he? All five of them were silent for a long moment, and Edelgard's face dramatically fell. You cannot be serious. Linhard slid backwards, barely avoiding Caspar's next three punches. I don't want to fight you, Linhard. I don't really want to fight you either, so how about we call it a draw and go take a nap? You know I can't do that. I have to save my dad. Why bother? Your dad is stronger than you. He'll survive. There's no way for me to know that. Ugh, you're really not going to back down, are you? Casper punched forwards, his leg darting out for a powerful roundhouse kick. Linhard's tome blocked it. Of course not. How could I back down when someone I love is in danger? He scowled. This was something that he didn't really want to do. Petra had come to him, alone, asking for help in killing Count Bergliez. Of course he had refused, but after she said she was doing it whether he agreed or not, he felt like he may have been dragged into things. All he promised her was that he would keep Casper off her back. He had no idea how irritating that could be. Did you even think about what you're fighting for, Casper? Edelgard is with us, you know. She's going to go back to the Empire no matter what, so right now, you're her enemy. Until the Empire falls, it's our duty to defend it. I'll stick to that until I die. Our duty? Is that you talking, or your father? It doesn't matter. I have to do my best. You know, your best will end up being over my dead body, and for once, I'm not speaking figuratively. That was the first thing that gave Casper pause, and Linhard backed off, lowering his tone. For the first time in a while, Casper seemed unsure of himself. After a moment, however, his expression hardened. I can't give up just because it hurts. Ah, really? That's a shame, I love giving up when it hurts. It usually means that something is wrong. Casper rushed towards him again, and he was forced to defend himself again. This time, though, Casper's heart clearly wasn't in it. Is it really wrong to try to help my dad? Linhard was quiet for a moment. You know, I never expected our first fight to be over your father. I figured I would sleep through something important you said, and you would get all mad at me over that. Then, after a series of comical misunderstandings, we would end up on the training grounds trying to kill each other. Casper's mouth was set in a thin line as he half-heartedly continued to fight. Isn't that kinda like what happened here? You slept through me telling you to be careful, and then you went and lost to the kingdom. That's why you're here now, right? By some technicality, yes. By another, no. I chose to be here, but I'm still fighting for the Empire, just not the one you're fighting for. Casper rocketed forwards with a strong fist, ice coating the ground behind him. Linhard cast fire magic to remove it. They continued on as they were. I still have faith in the Empire. Things can change, but if we abandon it at the drop of a hat, then they'll only ever get worse. Linhard felt annoyance simmer at the edges of his mind. You know, those who slither in the dark are at the very top, whispering in Agir's ear. The Empire you're fighting for is just a puppet dancing on a string. I want things to be better, for people to be able to live their lives the way they choose. That'll never happen if I just let things ride out. Casper raised his fists, the gauntlets as intimidating as they were at the start of battle. Then I guess we're enemies now, huh? Linhard sighed. You're so reckless. Since when were we enemies just because we have different opinions? You're still the same Casper that I know and love, and I'm still the same Linhard that you know and love. We don't have to fight just because we think differently. Then why are you still holding me back, Linhard? Casper growled, punching out with a particularly powerful fist. Linhard stumbled back. Because Petra asked me to. If you were there, she would definitely die. I've seen too much blood during this war to put hers on my hands too. So you're gonna let my dad die to save Petra? Casper growled, raising his fists. Linhard sighed. Yes. That simple phrase floored Casper, who stared at him wide-eyed. Languidly, Linhard lowered his eyes, staring at the ground. 1,000 times over, I would sacrifice your father to save someone I care about to save you. I know it hurts, but there was no avoiding that confrontation. It was either she go and get herself killed in a pointless battle and we all feel bad about it, or I stop you here and help you weather the burden of losing your father afterwards. Besides, if you stayed, I'm not sure if Petra would have fought to kill you too or not. Casper grit his teeth. That I can't accept that. I won't let him die. He fought with a renewed vigor, and it was all Linhard could do to keep away from him. For the first time in that battle, he was seeing the true fruits of Casper's training, and it was scary. Linhard was sent flying backwards with a particularly powerful punch, and the last thing he saw before landing flat on his back was Casper's desperately enraged face. He yawned. "Linhard, take this seriously, damn it. I am. You win, I lose. Go save your dad, or whatever. Weren't you the one who said that I'd have to do it over your dead body? Get up." I don't really want to." "What, so you're just going to go back on everything you said earlier? Where's your spine, Linhard? Did you leave it behind when you were defeated for the first time?" "I'm not going back on it, I just don't really like the look on your face." "What, are you calling me ugly or something?" Maybe. Your face looks ugly when you get mad at me." Casper scoffed. "I'm not whatever. Quit distracting me. If you're not gonna stop me, then I'm gonna go help my dad." "Do you even know where you are?" Linhard asked. The sounds of footsteps stopped. "No, Linhard, where did you even warp me to?" "Oh, you know. Around. Hey, the sky looks really nice. Are you sure you don't want to nap with me?" "Now's not the time for jokes, Linhard. I have to go dash." "It's probably already over, Casper. You know that a fight like that would end quickly. He's either gone or he's not. It was over the second I warped you. But, head north, and you'll make it back to Alel. We're really not far." "Thanks, man. And, which way is that, again?" Linhard vaguely pointed in a northish direction, and Casper happily hurried off. As the sounds of footsteps faded, Linhard let out a small sigh. "Guess this really is a good spot for a nap. It's warm, and the sun is rising, maybe I can forget my duties for a little while. Just a little while." Linhard's snoring became the only sound in the area for a very blissful hour. Bemused, Claude stared down at Linhard. "Wakey wakey, we've got some work to do." Claude watched as Linhard returned to consciousness. "Those are my least favorite words," he complained. "Yeah, they're not my favorite either. Unfortunately, you're the only person not accounted for among everyone else," and Edelgard was starting to freak out on Casper because he couldn't remember where he left you. "Come on, now, up you get." Claude lifted Linhard, brushing some leaves from his back. Linhard yawned. "What happened with Count Berglis?" "Oh, him? He's fine. His pride is down in the gutter and his back has seen better days, but he's an old man, so neither of those two things are new. Kinda surprised Petra left him alive, honestly." Linhard stood, not bothering to brush the dirt from his clothes. "Me too. I thought for sure one of the two would have been dead. How did you find me, anyways?" Claude chuckled. "My wyvern came and followed your scent. Think she likes you? Come on, everything's already wrapped up. With you back, it'll be just like Gareg Mach all over again." Linhard frowned. "Gareg Mach? It's been a while since I thought about that time. Well, there's nothing for it, I suppose. Guess I'll head back." Linhard began to trudge back, and Claude sighed as he watched him go. "Yeah, just like Gareg Mach. The Knights of Syros, the Kingdom, the Federation, and the Empire, all working for a single cause. How insane was that, huh? Never would have thought something like that could happen when multiple of those factions were all at war. Gareg Mach was the centerpiece of something incredible right now. If everything went well, the next 12 hours, hell, the next 30 minutes could dramatically swing the future in any of myriad directions. Rhea, Dimitri, and Edelgard, if he could only get all of them talking, then things could change the way he wanted them to. Objectively, he knew that idea wasn't a great one. Rhea and Edelgard had enough bad blood between them to fill out an ocean. Still, though, a boy could dream. If everything worked out well. Of course, even if everything went well, things were still bound to get messy after Gareg Mach. For a blessed few days, they could be at peace, without any of them being at each other's throats. For now, though, the Knights of Syros and the Empire were at a standstill. Neither of them could attack the other without risking heavy losses. and he would encourage that peace for as long as possible. From his understanding of things, Edelgard wanted the same thing he wanted, and that was for Rhea to be dead. He tried to hide that fact as much as possible in case it came back around to Dimitri somehow, but looking at things as they were, he didn't see any good future where Rhea was still alive. Her church, or, thinking about what Edelgard told her, just Rhea had held back all of Fodlan for centuries now. If she was gone, then they could break down the boundaries that held everyone back from reaching out to each other and move forward as a nation. Unfortunately, from his understanding of things, Dimitri still needed Rhea around. It was kind of a problem when peace in your kingdom hinged on the word of the archbishop who's controlled everything from the shadows for around 1,000 years now. The only way to get Dimitri onto his side would be to either remove the church's influence from Faerghus, not happening, or to somehow convince him that removing Rhea would actually calm things down in Faerghus, also not happening. If he just up and killed Rhea at any given moment, then suddenly the kingdom and the Federation were locked into a forever war, and he wasn't really in the mood for a forever war. This one's been going on for 3 years, and he was already growing sick and tired of it. In that case, was Edelgard his best option? When she sat back down on the throne in Inver, her empire would be vastly weakened, and winning a war with Faerghus would be difficult, but possible. If they needed to fight against Dimitri in order to free Fodlan, he would. He would certainly not have a good time doing so, for multiple reasons, but he was willing to do it. She was after the same result as him, but he highly doubted they shared the same goal. Time's flow would always break apart the three of them, he felt. They would all progress in some way, no matter what. At the end of the day, once Thales was dead, and he was certain that he would end up dead, they were free to act as they pleased. When that happened, where would the lines in the sand be drawn? That was why the next few days were some of the most crucial days there had ever been for Fodlan's future. There were no grand battles to make, no exceptional foes to fight, no enemies to kill or valleys to pass. It was just 4 different peoples, all of whom were at peace for a short time after so many long years of war. It was the only time all of their ships could dock in the same harbor. And that meant that there were things to do, and more importantly, people to see. He climbed back up onto his wyvern, and with a short pat, she flew him back to their camp. The kingdom's accommodations were better than their own. All those battles spent pillaging the enemy made it a lot easier to improve the standards of your camp. With the Black Eagles' strike force likely as poor as they ever would be and the Federation fresh off of a hellish march, it was only fair that they be provided for instead of being the ones providing. The camp was such a bustle of activity that he couldn't look one way or another without seeing a familiar face or a group of soldiers interacting with previous enemies. The aftermath of the battle had been a bit brutal. Burn Cream was suddenly really hard to come by, and apparently, Didu had been hurt pretty bad. All of their best healers had seen him, though, and he was walking around being as harmlessly menacing as usual. Claude moved quickly, dropping off his wyvern at the stables and whistling as he walked through the camp. There were a lot of people here, but he was only really looking for one in particular. That didn't mean there weren't a bunch of people he had to talk to, but this first conversation was gonna be pretty pivotal, probably. After a few minutes of meandering around, Claude finally found the person he was looking for. "Hey, Cyril." The other boy or man, now paused his cleaning of the tools to glance up at Claude. "Heya, Claude. What's up?" His tone was curt, but Claude got the feeling that he was like that with everyone. "I was looking for you. Mind if I borrow you for a bit?" Cyril frowned. "I shouldn't stop what I'm doing. Lady Rhea told me dash. See, this is actually about Lady Rhea in the first place. That's why I came to you, because you're one of the closest people to her." At that, Cyril paused and actually properly regarded him. "What do you want with Lady Rhea?" "She'll talk to Yad if you ask her to, you know." "Yeah, I know, but this isn't something that I can really hear from her. See, what I want to know is what she's like as a person." "What she's like as a person?" "Yeah, you know, tell me what she's like to you, and maybe other people. Is she strict, or rude sometimes? All I've really seen of her is when she was met at some heretics, so dash." "No. Lady Rhea is the kindest person I've ever met." Cyril immediately countered, and Claude blinked. Okay, he had expected this. "How so?" He asked conversationally. She took me in when I was young, and she took in a bunch of orphans who lost their home from the war. She's been doing so much to help people that she's been running herself ragged. I'm trying to help her so much because of that she can't be everywhere at once. Okay, taking action to preserve her public image. I can get that. Hey, Cyril, forgive me if this is rude, but, you're from Almira, aren't you? Cyril shrugged. Yeah, I am. Why? Claude blinked. He hadn't really expected him to be so blasé about the whole thing. I was just wondering if you ever missed home. I mean, you've been working for Lady Rhea like a slave dash. It was worse back home, and she's a whole lot nicer than you're making her out to be. Cyril's lips were drawn into a slight frown, and Claude's eyebrow furrowed at the implication. Worse back home? So Almira is worse than Fodlan? Cyril shrugged, turning his attention back to the swords. Yeah. I became an orphan when I was young because of the war. Didn't have anywhere to go or anyone to rely on. The king never did anything for us, and everything only got worse. Far as I'm aware, it still is getting worse, and with that botched attack the Almirans just made, I don't think it's gonna get any better. Ugh, and that attack was all my fault, too. If I didn't leave home without telling my old man where I was going, maybe he would have been focused enough to stop Shahid from stealing away all those troops. But then I never would have gotten here in the first place. I'm sorry to hear about that, Cyril, he responded empathetically. It is what it is. I had to stop being a kid quick, but I also got to meet Lady Rhea and Shamir and all the Knights of Syros. The people in the kingdom are a bit weird, but they're nice, too. It was for the better, let me tell you what. Claude frowned. Do you ever feel like, I don't know, Lady Rhea might be using you? All I've ever seen you doing is chores. Cyril frowned. Lady Rhea doesn't really let me fight. Says she doesn't want a kid to get hurt. Besides, I'm plenty happy doing all this for her. Most of the time, I have too much free time, so I'll ask for more to do. So you're fine if she uses you because she took you in. Cyril's frown grew fierce. Lady Rhea isn't using me, Claude. I'm helping her because I want to be useful to her. Yeah, no, it really sounds like you don't like her, but you should know that she's a lot better of a person than you are, Claude. Claude's lips pressed into a flat line. Is that so? Yeah, it is. You seem like the type of guy who would smack down anyone who got in your way, but Lady Rhea's not like that at all. She didn't take me or any of the other orphans in because we could be useful to her or because she wanted to look good, she did it because she wanted to do it, I can tell ya that. She takes so much time out of every day just helping people, or healing people who got hurt, or even fighting to protect the kingdom and the knights. Claude paused for a moment, taking the time to truly evaluate the person in front of him. Before him was an Almiran in full blood. The only thing that separated him from the army they fought not a few days earlier was the fact that he had been raised in the monastery. But now, the second that Claude said that Rhea might have been using him or had been doing things selfishly, Cyril immediately went on the defensive. That really raised a few possibilities in his mind as to what was actually going on with Rhea. Firstly, was his defensiveness over Rhea something that she personally ingrained in him? Based on what Edelgard said, it was entirely possible that she purposefully raised Cyril to have this level of loyalty. She could have manipulated him into thinking that she was this kind and benevolent ruler when in actuality, she purposefully held back Fodlan to further strengthen her endless regime. At the same time, it could just be something that came naturally to Cyril. Secondly, was that kindness actually real? He didn't know much about Rhea, truthfully. They only had that small stint at the officers' academy to base it off of, but when it came to personal interactions, the most anybody got with her was staring at her from afar as she did archbishop things, most of which he was decidedly not a fan of. It was kind of blasphemous to go to church for a goddess that you didn't believe in, right? With all that said, the most he knew about her character was what he got from Cyril and Edelgard, both of which painted two very different pictures. Was she faking her kindness or did she genuinely want the best for Cyril and those orphans? Thirdly, if her kindness was real, then, was killing her the best option? He was hesitant to say yes. The last thing he was going to do was forget what she had done regardless of the circumstances or regardless of her character. She had undoubtedly kept so many secrets that could dramatically change Fodlan forever, most of them probably for the better. Her stance towards other nations and technology were also a big issue for him. But, if she had some other reason for hiding all of that, for playing the part of a benevolent ruler and archbishop when she was actually an immortal dragon, then would that reasoning be enough to keep her alive? Fourthly, if her kindness was false, then would killing her solve all of their problems? Cyril was keenly devoted to the Church of Syros only because he had been in an incredibly poor situation and the King of Almira had done absolutely nothing to help him while Rhea had swept in and saved him. Even if you shoved all the propaganda in the world down the throats of the people, they wouldn't forget that kindness, regardless of how real it was. Would the stain of destroying the church stay with them forever? Would the people rebel against their efforts to bring unity out of sheer spite for what they did? Finally, regardless of the situation, who was the better person to ally with? Dmitri was required to keep the church close to his chest, but he wasn't entirely on their side. He could be convinced away, or even fought away if the situation called for it. If Rhea truly was a heartless monster like Thales who sought to enslave humanity, then he would have to face Dmitri at some point and win. That would require allying with Edelgard and the Empire, and breaking off the alliance with the kingdom. However, if Rhea genuinely wanted the best for humanity and was just kinda being stupid and annoying about it, then was there a way to make allying with the kingdom worth it? He'd already lied to Dmitri and told him that he would be okay with just removing Rhea from power. All he would have to do was make the lie real and coast along until Rhea was out of the picture. Of course, that would put Edelgard as their enemy. There was no way for them to reach a consensus on something like this. Edelgard wanted Rhea dead, and Dmitri wanted Rhea alive. So long as both facts were true, the Empire and Kingdom would remain at war after this little armistice. Letting out a small sigh, Claude rubbed his temple with his palm. Yeah, Cyril, you're right. I'm sorry. Guess the war's been rubbing me the wrong way. I've been wondering if dash. And then, from behind, a voice. Claude, do you mind if I borrow you for a moment? I have something important to speak to you about. Claude perked up, turning around to greet him. Hey, Dmitri. It's been a while. Good to see you. Sorry I never said hi during the battle earlier. Dmitri gave him a tight-lipped smile. It's quite all right, Claude. My apologies, Cyril. I hate to drag you away from a conversation like this, but this is something that must be kept between Claude and I. Cyril shook his head. Nah, it's all right. Claude was just about to leave, anyway. Ouch. Dmitri's smile turned more chipper. Ah, in that case, I suppose there isn't much to apologize for. Come, Claude, I fear that there will not be many other chances to speak. Claude shook his head. Yeah, I hear you. It's gonna get hectic from here on out. Dmitri turned and began to walk. After a short moment, Claude joined him at his side. He cast one final look back to Cyril, who had gotten back to work. I wonder. Edelgard made sure her axe was affixed firmly to her back before she left her tent. Aimer, it was a weapon made specifically for her. Ferdinand and Hubert had found it in a facility where the Agarthans were making artificial heroes' relics, darker versions of the ones already plaguing Fodlan. Unfortunately, neither Hubert nor Ferdinand could figure out where they were sending those relics, or where they were now. She wasn't quite sure how she felt about using it, but it was merely another tool at her disposal. Without Labrunda, she needed any ammunition she could get in order to win this fight. She had already taken it to the blacksmith and doled out a health fee to improve the weapon as much as possible. Still, glancing around, there was no force on Fodlan that could possibly combat the forces gathered here. The Knights of Syros and Kingdom alone had caused her a myriad of headaches over the years. Add the Federation and her own personal task force, and the Agarthans would need to do the impossible to defeat them. When the sun rose the next day, they would begin the march to the south. There were nearly no forces left in the Empire's arsenal that could even stymie their flow, at this point. With Count Berglis and the Death Knight joining their ranks, it would be impossible for them to stack up. There was no worry, but there was also no need to slow down. Until that time, however, the commanders had little else to do after assembling their forces and dictating the logistics. Dmitri had left somewhat early from the War Council, stating that he was going to search for Claude, who had left quite some time ago to aid in the search for Linhard. That had left her alone with several of the kingdom commanders and little support in the way of her own, aside from Hubert. Despite their allegiances, however, the kingdom was courteous. Mercedes vouched for her well, and everyone worked together. She shook her head. That type of unity was nice, but it was only a farce for now. What she wanted and what was necessary were two different things. She would have to wade through an ocean of blood in order to build her world where all things could be decided by merit, and most of that blood would come from the people in that war council. For now, though, the clouds above were white, the sun was shining kindly, and there were smiles in the air. She hadn't realized how important her presence had been to the empire. Well, perhaps that wasn't true. She knew of her importance, but what she failed to consider was how important she was to her citizens. She had long prepared herself to be hated and reviled by her people for her actions, and yet every time they went to battle, more and more Empire soldiers defected to join the strike force and more citizens helped them as much as possible. Food, workers, soldiers. Her mere presence was sapping that from the puppet empire that had cast her aside. There was an unbound sense of hope in the air. Her citizens greeted her with incredible enthusiasm, many of them shaking her hand. Hubert hung at her back, giving her a soft and kind smile, a far cry from the normal menacing look he wore. Even the kingdom and the Federation were kind to her, many of them wishing her well and walking away with smiles on their faces. The Knights of Syros were, understandably, distant, which was for the best. She didn't particularly want to interact with them either. They were walking past the training grounds on the way to the dining hall when she spotted Seath approaching Caspar from a distance, Flame tittering along behind her brother. Curious, she approached, with Hubert behind her. There was already a small crowd behind them, as Caspar seemed to be running a training drill of sorts. Some experience with brawling. Perhaps I could give you a tip or two. Seath's smile seemed genuine, but she narrowed her eyes anyways. Whoa, really? I mean, are you sure about that? Caspar trailed off, eyes darting to the ground. Seath crossed his arms, his smile falling into something more magnanimous. We are allies for the moment, and I will never turn down the opportunity to teach. That weapon was your father's, was it not? It's a sacred weapon attuned to the crest of Sikal, a crest that I happen to possess. If you allow me to borrow that weapon for this single session, I can show you how to more efficiently use it. Caspar seemed hesitant, but he glanced back into the crowd, meeting her eyes. Slowly, she nodded, and he turned back to Seath. Sure, why not? I'm always down for a good brawl. The two exchanged gauntlets, Seath slipping on Count Bergliez's old gauntlets and Caspar slipping on a pair of brave gauntlets. She was somewhat worried since they were using live steel, but she imagined that Seath knew what he was doing. While he was one of Ria's closest advisors and one of the largest threats to her plan aside from Dmitri and Ria herself, he still was one of the kinder people she had met. Had she remained in the officers' academy, she imagined that he would have been quite a good instructor. Edelgard crossed her arms as Caspar and Seath began to brawl, starting slowly. He talked Caspar through the intricacies of the weapon carefully, showing him how best to use it. Eventually, the fight escalated, and their fists began moving far faster, steel clashing on steel. And then, from behind, a small, timid voice spoke up. Lady Edelgard. Edelgard startled, turning to face the girl. Flame. Is there something you wanted? Well, my brother told me not to talk to you, but... Edelgard sighed. She hadn't expected anything else. And yet here you are. Flame swallowed, her eyebrows furrowing in concentration. It was somewhat adorable, actually. I wanted to talk to you. Maybe not about the war, but about other things. She raised an eyebrow. From behind, Hubert cleared his throat. Shall I take my leave, Lady Edelgard, or shall I remain? She glanced back at Hubert. Do as you wish, Hubert. We are safe here, nobody will raise a blade to us. Ah, but before you go, there is something I want you to do. Hubert raised an eyebrow. I am at your command, my lady. She leaned in close, speaking in a whisper. While I have you, investigate my mother for me, Lady Anselma. Dimitri tried pressing me for information on her on multiple occasions. See what connection the two have. Very well, Lady Edelgard, I shall see that Ferdinand has not made a fool of himself in my absence. With a short bow, Hubert departed, his excuse flawless, and they were alone once more in the excitable crowd watching two men train. Flame bit her bottom lip, not speaking for a long moment. Eventually, Edelgard sighed. Flame, if there is something you want to talk about, then you just have to speak. I won't be here forever. Ah, yes. It's just, how do I convince my brother to give me a bit more freedom? She asked quietly. Edelgard blinked, tilting her head in confusion. Can you explain a little further? I'm afraid that I don't know much about the situation between you and your brother. He's too protective over me. He keeps on chasing away any boy I try to talk to, even if I just want to be friends with them. He even threatened King Dimitri once after I offered to make him food as thanks for all he's done. All I want is to go out and enjoy myself without him hovering over my shoulder all the time. Flame complained, her voice a furious whisper. Edelgard was genuinely taken aback. That problem, it seemed so normal. It painted a completely different picture than the harsh and stern Church of Syros that she had seen. Why did you want to come to me for this? Surely someone else would be a better option, she argued. At that, Flame's eyes dropped to the ground. Well, you have a way with words. You're incredibly strong-willed, and you can get people to join your cause with a single speech. I was hoping you would have advice because you seem to be able to do anything you put your mind to. That, and, you seem lonely. I wanted to try to make friends in this time we have, even if I'll lose them soon. She raised an eyebrow. You would make friends with me despite knowing that we'll be fighting soon. Flame looked somewhat embarrassed. Well, you aren't too unpleasant to speak to, I would think. We may be at war once more at some point, but that does not mean that I can't enjoy the time I have with you. Edelgard huffed a short laugh. Very well, then. If you want his hovering to stop, then you need to be clear with your feelings. Tell him, without any reservations, what you want, and if he brings your safety into the equation, then show him how you've grown. You're an adult in your own right, and you deserve to live a life without him looming over your shoulder the entire time. He ought to be able to give you that, at least. Flame was staring at her, eyes somewhat wide, before her expression relaxed and became far warmer. Edelgard found herself returning the smile in its entirety. Thank you, Lady Edelgard. I will be sure to dash. A whistling sound came from Flame's right, and Edelgard jumped. Glancing towards the source of the noise, she saw Shay, still wheelchair-bound, watching the fight. Hit him harder, Casper. At that call, she realized that she had missed the vast majority of the sparring match. Turning her attention back forwards, she was met with a far different sight from the one she had initially seen. Seith's normally orderly and calm visage was now far more scuffed. His shirt was ripped, exposing the entirety of his left arm and the vast majority of his bicep to the world. There was a certain wild look in his eyes that hadn't been there before, and he was fighting with a strange vigor. Casper wasn't much better. His armor held deep scratch marks, and a thin trickle of blood ran down his head, likely where Seith had caught him with the edge of a blade. Shay? What are you doing? Flame's voice was unusually small. Shay perked up, glancing up at the two of them. Oh hey, Edelgard, Flame. Just figured I'd roll on by and see what was going on. Didn't know I'd get this kind of view, though. She cracked a joke, an easygoing smile growing on her face. Edelgard glanced at said view, and she frowned. Are you referring to Seith? Shay grinned. Look, I'm not gonna claim to be anything like Manuela, but I can recognize a good-looking guy when I see one. No offense, Flame, but your brother can get it. Flame, well, she looked absolutely horrified. Edelgard sighed. Please, do try to control yourself. I don't want to see you salivating. I am going to take my leave. Flame squeaked, practically darting from the scene. Edelgard watched her go, somewhat bemused. She cast one more look to the sparring match, and fixed her hair. I will be taking my leave as well, Shay. Try not to linger too long. Remember that Seith is a holy man. Yeah, Yeah, I know I just did it to mess with Flame. Hey, I'll catch you later, Edelgard, yeah. She gave Edelgard a wave as she was leaving, and Edelgard just gave her a nod in response. Edelgard departed from the training grounds, letting out a small sigh. As she walked through the camp, she spotted multiple pairs of people talking. Some were expected. Ignatz and Raphael were close friends and thus would naturally speak more often, whereas something more unexpected was Marianne and Bernadetta. The pair had rarely spoken, well, ever, let alone to each other. Had she waited longer to attack the church, would these types of relationships have formed naturally? Would that even be for the best? What she needed was a unified Fodlan, and its next leaders would naturally be a large part in that. It would be nigh impossible to govern Faerghus territories without the expertise of Faerghus lords, unfortunately, which meant that she needed to somehow win them over to her side, preferably through peaceful means. Would that time lost in the officers' academy cause problems when it came to that unity? It was impossible to say. It was equally impossible to determine whether or not waiting would even have been a good use of her time. The more time she spent lax, the more time Rhea had to exert her grip on the world, and the more time Thales gained to further his sickening experiments. She shook her head. She couldn't afford to look back to the past. She'd done that far too much already. All she could do was look forward. Her eyes wandered to the side, and she frowned. There were two more familiar faces, Dimitri and Claude. They seemed to be engrossed in a rather important conversation. She had never seen Claude look quite so incensed before. His expressions were usually quite controlled. Dimitri, on the other hand, was remaining calm. She narrowed her eyes. Claude was a predictable chaos. If nothing else, he could always be counted on to cause trouble. Dimitri was a more confusing chaos. He was predictable at times, but it was far more common for her to be caught off guard by his actions. His motives were strange, his eyes deceptive, and his allegiances foggy. Had she the choice to side with either of the two, she would choose Claude, because she could at least rely on his unreliability. For now, however, Claude and Dimitri were in an alliance. She had attempted to lean into Claude's beliefs in hopes of swaying him to her side, and it was a gamble that seemed to have paid off in some capacity. Edelgard chose to ignore them. If they wished to have a clandestine meeting while they were all supposed to be working together, then let them. She would stay on the outside, where she belonged. It would only hurt them all if she attempted to get closer. Determined, she moved through camp. There were many things to do and many plans to craft. Flicking her hair behind her back, she pressed on, one foot in front of another. Byleth looked at his sword in dismay. The steel had completely fractured and broken. It wasn't the first time it had happened, but he desperately needed a new weapon. Suthies tooted at his predicament from over his shoulder. This cannot stand. We are stronger than this, surely. We would not have lost to that man if not for our weapon. Slowly, Byleth nodded. He agreed with her. He had sparred with Juritzah earlier. The man was powerful, but their spar had ended with both of them unsatisfied. Juritzah craved a challenge, and he craved someone he could face unfettered. Using the Divine Pulse was obviously off the table, but his sword skills hadn't been enough to make up for the difference in the quality of their weapons. There was only one person whom he could talk to get a better weapon. He raced through the camp, ignoring the multiple people who called out to him. There were more people than he was comfortable with in this army. His status had been elevated far more than he liked. His stint with showing off his power in front of Claude had drawn too many eyes. Suthies had scolded him for it, but he felt it necessary. Eventually, he found Geralt's mercenaries, and Geralt himself. Geralt. I need a weapon. Geralt paused in his talks with one of the Knights of Syros, turning back to him with surprise on his face. Again? You've been going through them real quick lately. Byleth nodded. I want something sturdy that I can call my own. Do you have anything like that? Geralt curled a hand around his chin. I think I've got something for you. Hold tight, kid, gotta go through the convoy. Geralt briskly set off, leaving him alone with the knight. She seemed capable, and a hero's relic hung on her hip. He noted it calmly, and then turned his attention elsewhere. Hey, you're the Ashen Demon, right? If you've got time tomorrow, I would be down for a spar. King Dimitri insisted on us staying with Lady Rhea, so I've been away from the action for way too long. Byleth glanced at the knight. I dash. Don't be rude. Remember what Seath taught you. May I ask for your name, my lady? Byleth asked begrudgingly. Originally, he was going to say, I have no idea who you are, but Suthies was clearly displeased with that. The knight cracked a smile. Oh, he has manners. I don't think I've been called a lady by anyone in a while. Anyways, I'm Catherine. Might know me better as Thunder Catherine. You're Byleth, right? He nodded. I am. You fight for Rhea? Yup. I'm one of her personal knights. I've gotten a ton of action over the years, so I wouldn't mind seeing how you measure up. Thoughtfully, Byleth nodded. He'd been worn down somewhat from the spar with Jarrett Saw, but he could easily go for more. I need a weapon first. I've got nothing good to fight you with. Almost as if on cue, Geralt returned, an elegant sword in his hands. Here, kid. He hefted the sword, and Byleth reached out and took it. Catherine whistled, sounding impressed. That's the sword that they give to the captain of the Knights of Siros, huh? That's a pretty big honor if you use that, Byleth. Geralt let out a short laugh. Well, it was just collecting dust in our convoy, and there's really nobody else who would be good for it. Go on, kid, try it out. Byleth nodded slowly, staring at the sword. Experimentally, he swung a few times, feeling the exceptional weight and balance of the sword. In fact, it even seemed to resonate with him. This sword is quite good. I can even feel how good it is. No, I think it feels as though it was made for our situation, in some way. What do you mean? I think we can combine our powers better if you use this sword. Our wills combining better, thanks only to a sword, how absurd it is to think of. Byleth. We must take this weapon. It's perfect. Thank you, Geralt. Geralt gave him a small smile. Glad to hear it, kid. Now, go off, and have some fun. I've got something I've got to deal with. We'll be back before the day is up. Byleth cocked his head. Where are you going? Geralt sighed. Got a job. Gonna help out Catherine and her partner with something. I'm a bit hesitant to work with the Knights of Siros again after all this time, but I suppose I have to see how things have been going in my absence. Don't wait up for me, all right? Byleth nodded slowly, watching as both Geralt and Catherine walked away, chattering about the mission. He gripped the sword tightly, sheathing it at his side. Strange that he would be so calm about this. I figured Byleth had turned, and was now face to face with one of the people that he both desperately wanted to talk to and wanted to avoid. Lady Rhea smiled beatifically at him, her face somewhat pained. Hello. Do you mind if we speak, if only for a short time? Chapter 11, Chromatic Star Sweeping Forth. Hello. Do you mind if we speak, if only for a moment? Byleth regarded Rhea carefully. The woman had, to put it bluntly, worried him in the past. Over time, however, and especially after his father distracted her, she had acted far more normally. He didn't know his significance to her, all he knew was that Suthies had a vague feeling of familiarity towards her. Considering her often cryptic messages about everything, that didn't mean much to Byleth. He wasn't sure to regard her as a threat or as an ally. Beneath her robes, he could tell that she had a powerful and well-built body. She walked with poise and grace, but it was impossible for her to fully disregard the instinctual movements of a fighter. Seath did it, Dimitri did it, Edelgard did it, Byleth did it. He could recognize the signs, and knew that when it came down to it, she could likely scrap with the best of them. However, at the same time, she was still the Archbishop of the Church of Siros, something he had never heard any details about, at all. Geralt had evaded the question even when pressed, and none of their mercenaries were particularly devout. There were the accusations from the Empire, but that didn't paint a very large picture of the Church as a whole. They were working with the Empire for now, but that was only because they could not allow Edelgard to go without paying them fully, plus interest. With all of that in mind, there was still too much he didn't know. Too many variables, too much knowledge he lacked in order to make an informed decision. He'd been wanting to talk to Geralt since the last time his father had talked with Rhea, but there had never been a good time. Now, he was cursing himself for not pushing. He narrowed his eyes. This woman likely held the answers he sought. Whether or not they were the correct answers was something he didn't know. Yes. Let's talk. He responded. Gratefully, she nodded, and he began to walk. Curiously, she followed after him at his side. What's your favorite type of tea? Byleth asked. Rhea glanced at him. I have a few preferences. Crescent moon tea is one of my favorites. He hummed. Strange. That was one of his own preferences as well, although he was impartial to most kinds. Tea wasn't a luxury he partook in often as a mercenary. He found them an open table easily enough, one under the shade of a tree. He set up the tea set while watching Rhea carefully. She seemed sad, somehow. He sat down as the tea finished, regarding the woman across from him with some suspicion. Folding his hands in front of him. So, what was it you wished to talk about? Rhea sighed, taking a deep breath and breathing in the fragrance of the tea. Truth be told, there is so much I wish to say to you that I fear there is not enough time in the day to fit it all. She wants you to make the first move. Ask her a question. Something relevant to her. How did you come to know my father? He settled on an easy question. Something small and safe. If she tried to obfuscate any information, he could cross-reference it with Geralt later. She seemed somewhat surprised at the question. Well, now, that's quite the story. I suppose Geralt wouldn't mind if I shared it. When we first met, Geralt was just an ordinary man working with a band of mercenaries, not one under his own name, mind you. He was so young at the time, not unlike the mercenary currently under King Dimitri. I was traveling with the knights when we met, and we happened to be fighting on the same battlefield. He leapt in front of a blade meant for me. He saved my life that day, and I repaid his kindness in full. I healed him that day, and brought him back to the monastery. When he fully recovered, I offered him a place amongst the Knights of Syros, and he accepted. Byleth stared thoughtfully. So, she tended to his wounds personally. This woman is not your mother, Byleth. I grow more skeptical of that claim with every passing day. He never told me anything about that. Why did he leave if he had you? Byleth pressed, and Suthies groaned within his head. Rhea gave him a bemused look. Ah, well, the situation between Geralt and I grew rather strained, especially shortly after your birth. It was a rather stressful time for all involved. From what he's told me, his worry for you drove him from the monastery to seek a more calm life, away from the rigor of the church. Truth be told, I have to agree with that decision. Had you remained, Byleth watched as she trailed off, her gaze dropping. You what? Rhea shook her head. My apologies. I was merely thinking of the past. If you had remained, I am certain that you would have been forced into a role that you did not wish for in the church. Seeing you now, I am certain it would be one that you would not be suited for. Your father, brusque as he is, raised you well. I fear that you would have grown to resent both myself and the church had you remained, especially when you've been given freedom for your entire life. Byleth hummed thoughtfully. Perhaps. I am a mercenary. That is all I have known all my life. I can't say for sure whether or not my thoughts would change in a different scenario, because it's all I have known. I don't even know anything about the church. Ah, that does not surprise me. Geralt always was the type to not speak of painful memories. However, as the Archbishop, I feel that I can provide at least a semblance of light on the church. If there is anything you wish to know, you have only to ask. He hummed thoughtfully. The war. I am currently employed by Edelgard. Her face fell. Yes, indeed. Edelgard, that child is quite troublesome. I am loath to work alongside her, blasphemer as she is. I would like nothing more to cut her down for her crimes against the goddess had I only the opportunity, but King Dimitri has specifically requested that I stay my rage for the time being. However, I am not disheartened by the fact that you are employed by her. It is, after all, only contractual. Why, I imagine that I could hire Geralt's mercenaries and receive your aid much the same as she has. Unless, of course, it is something more than contractual. Her tone was probing, and Byleth shook his head. I don't know or care about Edelgard's cause. She pays me well, and she owes me money. That's all. Rhea smiled radiantly. That is wonderful to hear. It would be awful if I had to face the child of a close confidant in combat over a difference in opinion. It truly is tiresome to speak of the war for now, however. I wish to relax somewhat in the presence of a trusted ally, not rehash the same conversation I've had with others countless times. Is there truly nothing else you would wish to know, while we have this time? Byleth tilted his head. There were many other things he wanted to ask, but... Your hair. Rhea looked up at him, a strange look to her face. Yes? What about it? It's green. Rhea's eyes seemed to melt into something warmer. Indeed. In truth, it was not always this vibrant color. In the past, it was once blonde. However, once the goddess blessed me with her divine protection, it changed into this color. Byleth's eyes went wide. Suthies inhaled sharply. The goddess. He leaned in. Tell me more. Rhea smiled. In the past, there have been very few phenomena where a person's hair and eyes could suddenly change. Only those whom the goddess blesses can experience such a drastic change, and those people are usually granted great power. The goddess, is she referring to me? Suthies sounded rattled. He couldn't blame her. Rhea continued, taking a sip from her teacup languidly. I've heard that you experienced such a phenomena yourself. Please, tell me, Byleth, have you had any strange dreams lately? Perhaps a tightness in your chest. Alarm shot through him. She knew. Somehow, she knew about Suthies. Those questions were too specific, too close to the mark for there to be any other possibility. Was she a threat after all? How should he handle this? Evasion? Should he confirm it? Deny? If things turned south, could he fight her and win before fleeing with weight? No, Geralt was with the knights. Damn, they may have engineered this scenario. But then... Time slowed to a halt, and Byleth closed his eyes, appearing before Suthies on her throne once more. The girl stared down at him, a pitying look on her face. You must be calm, Byleth. We can talk our way through this. Take things one step at a time. No matter what, I will always be with you. Byleth breathed in, then slowly out. Yes, you're right. I should face her. He opened his eyes, time resumed, and he loosened his grip on his sword. Rhea was still staring at him expectantly, and Byleth spoke. I've been having strange dreams all my life. There is a war, and a young girl. I see a woman and a man fighting. And, the Red Canyon. She always mentions it. As he finishes speaking, he glances back up to meet her gaze. Rhea's eyes are wide, and she is breathing shallowly. I see. Is there anything else? Does that young girl speak to you? Suthies, do you want me to tell her? Do you want to tell her? I am not the one who has to bear the burden of that information. Why are you asking me this, Archbishop? If you can tell me that, then I will answer all of your questions. Rhea's eyes were frantic. The events you are describing seem to detail the battle between Cyros and Nemesis on the Tailtean Plains, an event that took place over 1,000 years ago. I believe that young girl may be the key to answering all of your questions. He was cautious. Suthies, if something goes too wrong, prepare to rewind time. Ugh, if you insist. You should save your power for better uses, but this is a circumstance where it may be applicable. She does speak to me, Byleth began slowly, and Rhea inhaled sharply, very often. In fact, sometimes she doesn't know when to keep her opinions to herself. Hey. It's true. You should still keep your manners. I am your most valued partner, you know. Yes. And I can keep my opinions to myself, thank you very much. It's just that you need my guidance so often that I fear you will perish without them. Yes. And dash. I see. Can you hear her voice even now, Byleth? Rhea asked, seemingly more in control of herself once more. Yes. She has many words for me. 700 laps around the throne. Rhea clasped her hands together. On this day, I feel truly blessed, Byleth. I believe you may be the first person in a very long time who can speak with the goddess. Suthies went silent. Byleth kept his face carefully blank. Are you certain about that? If anyone else told you what I said, you would likely call them crazy. My father doesn't believe me when I say that I can hear her voice. Rhea smiled. Of course I believe you. How could I not? After all, it is said that Saint Ceros herself could hear the voice of the goddess Suthies once upon a time. His mind screeched to a halt, and Suthies made a choking sound within his mind. She really was talking about me? Maybe you're just named after her. The first thing I thought about when I came into existence was the fact that I was Suthies, the beginning. How could that possibly be any different? How is it possible that Suthies herself can speak to me? Explain further. Rhea smiled, her face awash with happiness. I was once blessed by the same progenitor god that you speak to. As two souls entwined by her power, our bond could be considered unbreakable. I feel a connection to you even now as I have from the first moment I saw your face. I believe you when you say that you speak to her because you are someone I cannot help but believe. Okay, so you're the goddess. What do we do about that? I don't know. Do we just keep going? What can we do about this? Byleth shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. I'm sorry, but I feel no connection to you. You're wholly unfamiliar to me. But I know, Suthies. Whether or not she's a fanatic who is making things up or if she somehow is involved with how we came to be together, no good can come out of pressing this point for now. Even letting her know of your familiarity is dangerous. Rhea pursed her lips, looking somewhat put out. I see. I should have expected as much. To you, I am but a stranger with a loose connection to your family, trying to upturn everything you have known in a single night. I apologize if I came on too harshly. Please, ask anything, and I will answer to the best of my ability. I wish nothing else but for us to be comfortable with each other. Her eyes were adoring, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. If he played this situation incorrectly, Seath had taught him a great many things about interaction with others. How to read their expressions, how to respond to certain provocations, what to do if someone was too pushy, etc. Normally, Byleth had a list of vague but safe topics he could press in order to draw the other person into a more engaging conversation where he could simply nod along and smile. In a situation like this, all that he had learned seemed to fall away in an instant, her erratic behavior and unknown knowledge swaying his decisions to the left and right constantly. Should I go back? Byleth. No. I think, this is a conversation that will inevitably happen. Looking at her face now, I can tell that she already knew about you. We should face this now. All right, but if you ever need a rewind, I can provide it. He reclined in his chair, kicking a foot over his knee. What would it mean for me, if I truly could speak to the goddess? Rhea's smile eased into something more practical, something more controlled. As I've said, there have been very few people who have heard the divine words of Suthies, none since Ceros herself. The mere fact that you have heard her voice means that you could very well become Archbishop of the Church of Ceros in the future, should you wish. Regardless of your choice, your very existence is a precious one as you are guided by the goddess, your life will last far longer than that of others, and your power will only grow when presented with divine artifacts that the goddess created. Byleth shook his head. My dreams for the future, I can't say that becoming Archbishop is among them. I've lived as a mercenary all my life. Dressing in robes won't help me fight, and it won't get me any money. Her eyes crinkled as she smiled. Your existence is far beyond that of a simple mercenary. You are an enlightened one, who is far beyond the common rabble. You deserve more and can freely desire more than them. The future is yours to shape, my dear. That manner of speaking, she acts as though she is far beyond the common man as well. What arrogance! We ought to put her in her place. Not now, Suthies. Come now, Byleth. The glove does not defy its hand. Put her down. Make her feel some humility for once. You're acting strange. Stop. Since now, I have been one of those common rabble. It is the only life I have known. Byleth argued back. Rhea merely clasped her hands in front of her. I know, and I cannot begin to express the depths of my sorrow for not finding you sooner. Had I been able to reach out to you earlier, then perhaps I could have saved you. A tear rolled down her face, and Rhea reached out to him, clasping his face with her hands. He froze, eyes going wide. Every instinct within him was telling him to bat her hands away, but he remained still. Not for himself, but for her. Tears were still streaming down her face, but she wore one of the happiest smiles he had ever seen on a person. Despite the concerning nature of her words in context, it seemed almost certain that she meant something else. Your eyes, and that beautiful hair, so silken, so much like mine, she murmured, running her hands through his hair. He grit his teeth. Finally, after far too long of a moment, light came back to her eyes, and she startled, backing away quickly. Oh, oh. Oh my apologies. I forgot myself. Please forgive me, I beg of you. Slowly, Byleth breathed in and out. It was strange. Please do not do that again. You cannot mean that. Please, my apologies. As much as I would like to get closer to you, I can't overstep. I mustn't overstep. She hugged her arms, a hollow look to her eyes, and Byleth came to a sudden realization. She's incredibly emotionally unstable right now. Are you just now figuring that out? It's worse than I imagined. If I don't fully accept her, she may have a full mental breakdown. He had seen mental breaks occur amongst the men before. Some had their friends cut down in front of them, others took an injury that would never heal, others lost family in an instant. They varied in intensity and in purpose, some lashed out, some recovered quickly. Some ended their own lives, some ended that of others. Juritsa was a man who never recovered from a mental breakdown. It was not his fault, but it was negatively affecting both himself and others. If the person in front of him broke, who would suffer? Suthies, turn back time. Bring us back to right before I told her it was strange. As you say. Time warped and bent to their will, and when Byleth opened his eyes again, it was to Rhea leaping backwards off of him. Oh, oh. Oh my apologies. I forgot myself. Please forgive me, I beg of you. 2 more pulses. He gave her a tight smile. It's fine. It wasn't uncomfortable at all. More tears welled up in her eyes, and she clutched her hands close to her heart. You cannot possibly imagine how that reassures me. Thank you. He regarded her carefully as she dried her tears with a handkerchief. Slowly, he took a drink of the tea. Suthies grumbled in his head. She's acting like a lost child and the mother of said child all at once. How vexing. It's difficult to discern anything concrete about this woman. We'll have to keep pushing. I'm not sure if she's my mother or not, but regardless, she's too close to my father for my liking. She was involved in my birth, so she's older than she looks. She did mention that you will have an extended lifespan, did she not? Yes. I am unsure how to feel about that. For another time, then. Indeed. Why do you not just ask her about your mother? Surely that will be the fastest route to your answer. Byleth sat and thought for a moment. The reason he hadn't asked, well, it was fear. He was worried that she would say yes, that she actually was his mother and that Gerald had kept him apart from her all of his life. He was worried that she was actually a horrid person beneath the layers and layers of kindness and instability she had shown him thus far. That his father had been right to remove his potential mother from him, and that the illusion he had built in his head of his mother would be shattered in an instant. It wasn't a hard concept for him to grasp. The idea that fear didn't exist within him was just something the mercenaries came up with. He fought every battle with a blank expression because they were just jobs, and he did his best on every job he was given. Working for King Dimitri was a reprieve from the usual killing, focusing more on subterfuge, but it was still a job nonetheless, and he completed it with his usual quality. However, that didn't mean that he was unafraid of the actions he had to take. Doubt plagued him sometimes, worry that he would miss a crucial sword swing, worry that one of the people he had met would never be coming home. That worry had only started at Arianrod, or maybe even earlier than that. The second he had reached out to Suthies, some of those emotions had come trickling in. While talking to Rhea, it felt as though those cracks were widening, and more of them were seeping through. Staring at her now, he could feel worry, anguish, revulsion, disgust, love, care, anger, kindness. It was a medley, a blend of different emotions he had never quite experienced before, and her presence was causing the gaping maw that was his unbeating heart to bleed red. How many of those emotions were his own, he wondered. Having never spoken to this woman before today, how could he even begin to feel anything close to love for her? Moreover, why were the feelings so intermixed? Anger and worry, fear and caring, light and dark all at once. He was uncertain what that meant for him. It was something to consider, something to look back on and wonder on. For now, he would remain impassive and give a smile when necessary. That was the safest option for dealing with those on the verge of breaking. He set his teacup down, and Rhea leaned in, looking ever the picture of poise and grace once more. Had someone looked at the pair now, they never would have assumed that the Archbishop had cried. He led the conversation once more. "What do you want from me, for the future? You said that I was an existence above others. What will that mean in relation to you?" Rhea's expression turned serious. "When we retake Garreg Mach, there are a few things that I wish for you to have. Firstly, there is an area below Garreg Mach known as Abyss. There is something that will appeal to you in particular down there. Secondly, within the Holy Tomb, there may be something you can find to your liking. Thirdly, in exchange for these, there is something that I would like you to do." Byleth huffed. Sothing grumbled. "How vague. Something that will appeal to you in particular? Something we can find to our liking? Why not give any more details?" "Tell me what you want," Byleth said in lieu of responding to Suthies. Rhea sighed, clasping her hands together in an earnest request. "Within the Holy Tomb, there is a throne. Please, I ask that you sit upon that throne. In ancient times, when Saint Syros was blessed by the goddess, and when I personally received her divine protection, that throne was where we received her power. Should you sit there, I believe that the goddess may appear to the world at large, and may even come into a body of her own." Byleth was wary about her words, Suthies was not. She let out a startled squeak. "A body of my own? Don't get too excited. But I can finally do things without you. I don't have to be tethered to your existence anymore. I thought you liked being with me." "Well, yes. You are my other half, the second piece to my soul. It isn't impossible to say that we are bonded on a spiritual level, and to separate from you sounds abhorrent. But it would be nice to touch things and eat food once again. The smaller pleasures are the ones you miss the most, you know." "Very well. We will sit upon the throne." Rhea's eyes sparkled, and Byleth almost cursed as he realized his slip of the tongue. "That would be wonderful, Byleth. I imagine that if the goddess returns to us, this strife that plagues our land will finally end. The wicked enemies of the goddess will have no foot to stand on when she rains divine retribution upon them." "Can you actually do that?" "Of course. How dare you doubt me? I just need to get back into the swing of things, that's all." "That would be nice. I'm getting paid well with the war, but it's getting tiring." There was a flash of disappointment in her eyes, but she remained smiling. "Yes, of course. I imagine that a mercenary would enjoy war. Should you ever seek employment after the war, then please, come to the Church of Syros. We will reimburse you generously." He tilted his head. "I wouldn't imagine that a church has much in the way of funds. We cannot maintain a monastery with faith alone, my dear. Those who ascribe to the faith pay a small tithe so that the church may remain standing, and there are no small number of those who believe in the goddess. Sadly, with the war, we are stretched thin, but things should return to normal once we win." He considered it carefully. "She's saying that she can make me rich if I just help them win the war." It was something to consider. "If I worked for you, what would that entail?" he asked slowly. "I imagine it wouldn't be much different from your current life. You would not be a knight in name, but you would have all of the benefits of one and more while retaining the freedom of a mercenary. I would like you to become a pillar of support for Fodlan in the future, and I will carve a path forward for you if I must." She gave him a beautiful smile behind her teacup. He nodded thoughtfully. I understand. I will think about it. Ria smiled wider, the slightest bit of teeth showing. That is all I can ask for. The two of them sipped their tea quietly for a moment. After a long moment, Ria let out a sigh and stood. I do not wish to end our time together so soon, but I have many duties I must attend to as Archbishop. Please, do not be afraid to seek me out. I will always make time to speak with you. Byleth nodded, standing up as well. It was good to meet you. Yes. Perhaps we can have tea again soon. Come find me tomorrow, and we shall talk. It sounded like an order more than a request, and unease filled him as he watched her leave. All in all, a perfect tea time. Seath would be so happy with us. Suthi's voice was sardonic as he robotically made his way back to the training grounds, his sword hanging loosely at his side. I'm worried that things will grow troublesome soon. Ha! Not to worry, you have the goddess on your side. With my power, you can do anything. Your ego is growing by the second. Control yourself. Just let me have this. The pair were quiet as he walked. Are you okay, Byleth? I'm fine. We are one. I can tell that you're not fine. What ails you? Come, tell me. There's too much I don't know. She's aggravating. She was around when I was born and she knew that you were with me. By some stretch, she may even know that I lack a heartbeat. If that is the case. You think she may have been involved? I think she may be the direct cause. It's possible, I must admit. If I am the goddess, then the fact that I recognize her does not surprise me, especially if I apparently gave her divine protection at some point. If so, then she may be a fanatic, one in a very high position. I am unsure as to why you lack a heartbeat, but if she had a role in it, then we must stay close to her for the time being, if only to get answers. Gerald may know. Shouldn't we ask him first? Gerald has told you nothing about your past voluntarily. He hides things from you constantly, Byleth. Why, you still do not know the name of your mother, and you are 23 years old. I'm 23. Now is not the time for that. My apologies. Don't roll your eyes at me. I could call that blasphemy, you know. You could be executed as a heretic. How would you feel then, huh? A small smile bloomed on his face. Even through a conversation like this, his heart felt lighter. Dimitri stood over the war map, a pleased smile on his face. Across from him, Claude sat with his feet up on the table, looking highly amused, and Edelgard was very pointedly not looking at Lady Ria, who was also very pointedly not looking at Edelgard. There has been an uprising in Karen territory to the southwest. For that reason, I propose that I lead the kingdom army to the southwest, while Claude and Edelgard lead their respective armies to the southeast. Am I to assume that you will be taking the Knights of Syros? Edelgard's tone was barbed. Dimitri sighed. Indeed. While we are all aligned for one purpose here today, there's still too much bitterness to go around between the Knights and the Empire. I feel this is best for everyone involved, unless you wish to bring them along with you. Dimitri retorted. No need to worry about us, your kingliness, we'll sweep through them. Hey, how about we make it a race? See who can catch Emperor Aegir first. Edelgard scoffed. Lady Ria sighed. This is something that we must take seriously, Claude. I admire your enthusiasm, but we must take every precaution. The slimiest of men have the most abhorrent methods of defending themselves. Let down your guard, and you will be the first to die. Lady Ria told him. Dimitri rested his hands on the table. Despite the crassness of the suggestion, Claude's words may hold merit. Perhaps we can have a contest of sorts. Our armies are far larger than anything the Empire is attempting to face us with. We can comfortably split and defeat every enemy with minimal casualties, so a boost to morale may be appreciated. At that, Edelgard actually looked interested, unfolding her arms and leaning back. Yes, Dimitri has a point. The Kingdom and Knights of Syros against the underdog Black Eagles strike force and Federation. It'll be like the Battle of the Eagle and Lion all over again. Dimitri grinned. So, she caught on as well. The thought of truly fighting her again, well, it made him uncomfortable. He would enjoy one final bout against her, even if it was something small and simple like this. Rhea let out a small sigh. As interesting as the idea sounds, I am afraid that there is nothing that I can offer as a reward until we retake Garreg Mach. It must be decided on your own. Claude smirked, and Dimitri felt his own heart lightening. Well, I think we can come up with a few things, don't you, Dimitri? He met Claude's knowing expression easily. Of course, I may have a few ideas. Edelgard pressed a hand to her temple. You two have grown far too close in recent times. Claude pouted. Ah, come on, Edelgard, you could stand to come into the group hug, too. Better to do it now before you start to regret not doing it later. We've got space for you, I promise. Dimitri watched her expression carefully. Her nose wrinkled, and she stared at Claude with barely masked annoyance. As much fun as that sounds, I am afraid that I'll have to decline. Honestly, Claude, can't you stay focused? I'm unsure how we're ever going to win a competition with your head in the clouds. Flippantly, Claude twirled an arrow and reclined even deeper into his seat. Ah, well, don't come crying to me later when you're feeling lonely. Sorry, Dimitri, I gave it my best shot. Edelgard glared at him, and Dimitri raised his hands in defense. Claude, don't drag me into your needling of Edelgard. It is difficult enough to stay in her good graces. Bold of you to imply that you were ever in my good graces, Dimitri, Edelgard replied snarkily. Despite her words, her expression wasn't entirely combative. See? You heard the lady, Dimitri. Might as well join me at this point, huh? Claude laughed. Lady Rhea let out a sigh. At times like these, I am reminded of how young the three of you are. That sobered the three of them up rather quickly, and Dimitri forced his smile down to focus on the war map once more. Right. My apologies. We should remain focused. Claude, Edelgard, your forces will focus on dealing with the remnants of Agir's army, taking down bandits, and securing a safe entrance to northern Burgundy territory. Lady Rhea, the knights, and I will be focusing on protecting kingdom territories that have come under fire from the Empire and brigands. Our primary goal will be to create an opening for our combat engineers to allow them to prepare for the coming battle. Is that amenable to you? Lady Rhea nodded. Indeed. As you know, I will not be accompanying you personally. I will be taking a small detachment of soldiers and commanders with me through a hidden entrance to strike at Garreg Mach and allow us to take it with more ease. I will meet you in the cathedral at the monastery. That seemed to draw Edelgard's attention. Which commanders are you taking? Lady Rhea cast her a harsh look. I will be taking Seath, Catherine, and Shamir. I will personally take the cathedral. They will be the ones to open the gates and allow your armies in. Slowly, Edelgard relaxed, and Claude sat up. All right, works for me. We'll try not to rush too much. Don't get yourself hurt too bad out there, Lady Rhea Fairgus still needs you for now. Dimitri nodded. His words are true, although they are rather isolated. For now, all of Fodlan requires your guidance. You must keep yourself safe. Dimitri kept a wary eye on both Claude and Edelgard. Despite their alliance, he knew that Claude held enmity with the church, and Edelgard had made her stance on them painfully clear. His talk with Claude yesterday had alleviated many of his worries and he felt comfortable in moving forward, but ultimately, there were many things out of his control, all of which he would have to rely on Claude and Edelgard for. Lady Rhea gave him a look that seemed almost pitying. I understand, King Dimitri. Do not fret over me, I am a capable warrior in my own right. For now, do not count me as a factor in your plans. Continue as you are. The goddess will lead us to victory, I am certain. There was a pointed silence, and Dimitri felt that her statement was somewhat depressing, considering her current audience. Dimitri was likely the only one who could agree with her from the outset, but even he did not find himself following her train of thought. He had long felt that the goddess lacked the heart to reach out to man, and that man lacked the hands to reach back. Her presence was something ethereal, a small glimmering star above that could do naught but guide them home on their darkest nights, but without glancing upwards, that star may as well be invisible. The blue sea star shone every night, but very few ever looked up to see its light. In that sense, the goddess was similar. She would not lead them to victory, not today, not tomorrow, and not ever. No, that role belonged to the harshly calloused hands of the men and women on this earth, who toiled day in and day out to build a brighter future, to protect those they cared about, to honor their ancestors and protect their way of life. He had long since given up on reaching out to the goddess, not when she refused to reach back. Not when her cruelty knew no bounds in allowing that evil to pollute Fodlan, in allowing them to take his father, all of those men and women, brothers and sisters, in allowing them to cause such harm in their experiments. Not when all of the ghosts in his ear begged him to end all of Agartha for their sins, and he was the only one who could answer their pleas. No, the goddess did not seek to cause retribution to those Agarthans, and if she did not do so directly. Perhaps she did not want to at all. Perhaps she could not do so directly. If that were the case, then for now, he would be her vengeful sword, the blade of the goddess upon Fodlan. He was Wilhelm to Aceros that did not walk this land. And when the time came, his own life would be extinguished, and he would meet the goddess with his head held high, prepared for the eternal flames. Thales, he would almost certainly be at the monastery. Everything would end at Gareg Mach. "Hey, Dmitri, you still with us?" Claude's soft voice broke him from his reverie, and he blinked, realizing that he had been caught in his thoughts for quite some time now. "Ah, my apologies. I fear I've tuned you out. Lack of sleep seems to be addling my brain lately." He laughed it off, blaming his physical condition when there was nothing wrong with him aside from in his head. Edelgard frowned at him. "I need you in your best condition if we're going to fight Thales. He's not someone we can take on easily, and he may show up at Gareg Mach. You can't get distracted like last time." Last time, Edelgard had been injured, and his wild instincts had taken over. His anger, his rage, his overwhelming worry had sent his well-honed instincts spiraling down the drain. All he knew was that he had needed to save her, to save his sister, because... No. He couldn't allow himself to finish that thought. "There is no need to be concerned, Edelgard. When the time comes, I will strike that monster down. It is perhaps the one thing I look forward to most." He knew there was a slightly deranged smile growing on his face, and Edelgard's frown deepened. She opened her mouth to speak, but Claude beat her to it. Yeah, you know we're gonna be right by your side, right? I'm itching to get a hit in on this guy, myself. Don't hog all of the fun, Dmitri." And just like that, he was reminded where he was, or rather, who he was with. Every single person here was aligned with him. All of them were fighting for the same thing, and it wasn't a situation like with his own army. No, these were three separate forces, all of them searching for the same brighter future as him, all of whom he could easily place his trust in. He could turn his back to Edelgard and find himself feeling safer, and he could say the same of Claude and Lady Rhea. His wasn't a crazed, revenge-driven march of madness. It was a shared cause, an acceptable outcome for all of Fodlan. The madness that crept under his skin didn't feel as aggrieved as it normally did, once he realized that. Lady Rhea gave him an approving nod as he finally gave his all into his focus. Dmitri shook his head, staring at the war map. "We should make good time if we leave when the sun is high. This campaign, it will be over by the end of the moon. Gareg Mach will be ours with one fell swoop." Edelgard sighed. "If nothing else, I admire your enthusiasm." Claude laughed. "It's one of his better qualities, I'll admit. Though sometimes, that enthusiasm can quickly become recklessness." Lady Rhea tooted. "With all of us fighting as one, that recklessness may become a boon. An intelligent nature that lacks trust, a forward-thinking mind that fails to look below, and a brave charge that ignores the pain it feels, all three of you have qualities that drag you down. Together, however, you shine brighter than any star could hope to. There is no enemy that can repel you, no obstacle that can remain in your way. Remember your unity, for it will serve you well in the coming days." Edelgard let out a recalcitrant sigh, although Claude seemed quite merry at her words. "Hey, you hear that, Edelgard? We can get along. I'm sure in some delusion of yours, that may be true. For now, all you're accomplishing is irritating me. Hey, those are some fighting words from someone I'm going to work with. Hey, Dmitri, can we swap? I'll go with you and Edelgard will go with the knights, how about that? Dmitri let out a small sigh as the other two continued bickering. Despite the circumstance, there was still a soft smile on Lady Ria's face. Perhaps she saw hope where he did not. Ultimately, as much as Dmitri was savoring his time now, he knew that everything would become far more complicated soon. Once they retook Gareg Mach, that was where he would settle things once and for all. Their campaign was swift. The kingdom army blazed their way south, the Knights of Syros bolstering their ranks. The promise of a reward at the end of this particular campaign was tinder under their boots, and the idea of showing up the Empire was enough to light a match and set the fire blazing. One battle after another, they fought. Daphnel territory was defended, Karen territory was brought under control, and before they knew it, they were making camp once more, victory in their hearts. Less than half a day later, the Federation and Strike Force rolled into their camp, and Claude certainly held plenty of half-hearted complaints. Edelgard merely seemed quietly disappointed. Eventually, they decided on a simpler sort of reward. The Federation and Strike Force would provide the funds for a feast for all of their soldiers. It was better than denying them a reward entirely. Enmity would only be fostered if they did such a thing, and the reward was meant to raise morale overall. Their armies ate quickly, and their commanders strategized quicker. Before the day was up and the sun was down, they were on the move once more. They had cornered Aegir. If they struck him down here, they could potentially end the war for good. Dmitri wasn't certain if that would be positive, not quite yet. Even if Aegir went down here, that would immediately cause even more chaos in Adrestia. Until Edelgard sat on the throne properly, she wouldn't be able to rule, although she remained the righteous ruler in the hearts of the people. Should Aegir fall, Thales himself may take the reins of Adrestia and supplement his own forces with the hapless people of the Empire, using them as human shields, fodder for his experiments, or worse. However, that did not mean that they could simply allow Aegir to walk free. They would earnestly fight to take him down, although if he survived, the war would retain a sense of predictability in its cruelty. Unsure of what tomorrow would bring, he grabbed his lance, and they set out onto the battlefield once more. Edelgard was the first to rise to action. "Come, my soldiers. If we fell the foe before us today, the Empire will be free from his oppressive hands tomorrow. To arms." The Strike Force let out a rousing cry and sprung to action, led by none other than Ferdinand. Claude gave off a teasing smile. "You heard the lady, everyone. Follow the Strike Force's lead. We can't have them showing us up right at the end." Dimitri's mouth tugged upwards, there was a small flame igniting in his heart, a strange, wistful hope for the future rising up. Perhaps that was simply the effect that Edelgard had on others. "For the future of Fodlan, we'll march on. Let us depose that false emperor." 3 armies marched as one, and there would be no force on the continent that could dare remain in their way. Except, as Dmitri prepared to charge forth, a messenger approached him. "King Dmitri, there's a problem," they gasped, breathing heavily. He frowned, worry sprouting forth. "Speak. Tell me what the issue is." "The commander, she's vanished, sir. Left the battlefield." "The commander, She left the battlefield? At a time like this? What would you do if we ended up being enemies one day?" He grit his teeth. "I'll chase after her myself. Inform Claude and Edelgard that they must shoulder this battle alone. Tell Felix to take command in my absence. Aegir must not be allowed to flee." Without waiting for a response, he dashed off. She would never leave the battlefield without prior warning. The information she's given me from the Agarthans didn't indicate that she would need to leave, either. There is always the chance that she would need to maintain her cover, but if that was the case, then that means that they're planning on launching a massive assault on our forces here, something that I highly doubt. That could only mean. His arms shook as he ran, trying to quell his worry. What if there's some, hidden memories or something that I don't have? What if I wake up one day and act like a completely different person? He hadn't spoken to her at length today. She had seemed somewhat distant, her sentences shorter and choppier, but he assumed she was stressed, not possessed. There's only one place she could be. In the notes from the Agarthans, they had focused very distinctly on one particular entity, the Fell Star. They called it a monstrous entity, something that they absolutely had to destroy. And they believed that the person who housed that entity was the Ashen Demon. He had to get to Byleth's side, as soon as possible. Byleth flicked his sword, staring at the blood on it dispassionately. Agir's forces weren't putting up much of a fight. They truly weren't a threat, even without his newfound powers. All of the talented commanders were already on their side. It was just that Agir himself had a talent for running away and leaving his men to die. He had stayed behind to finish this detachment of soldiers. Unfortunately, he was a slower fighter. He couldn't keep up with the multiple cavalry units, but he excelled at killing the enemy commanders. It was his specialty, so to speak. Single combat was something he had never lost at. He heard footsteps behind him, and he turned. He tilted his head at the new arrival. "Shay. What are you doing here?" His suspicions were raised. The mercenary was rarely seen out of her chair, let alone on the front lines. And then, she raised her head to him, and there was rage in her eyes. "I'm here, to end this." She dashed forwards, both swords at the ready. Alarm flashed through him, and he raised his sword to the ready position. A betrayal now? Had King Dimitri ordered this? She slashed forwards, and he frowned. The attack was almost pitifully slow in comparison to the last time they had fought. She moved like someone who had never even considered fighting in her condition. Dark magic suddenly erupted forth from her hands, its hungry maw engulfing the space around him, and he couldn't raise his sword to block in time. When compared to her sword skills, that magic was far more developed. The ends of his cloak were frayed as he dashed backwards, barely avoiding the attack and gritting his teeth. "What are you doing? Just kill this fool," Suthis complained. There was a flash of purple before him, and Shay appeared in front of him, her eyes wild and manic. And a sword plunged through his chest before he could respond. Chapter 12, Chromatic Star Rage of Zaras. Byleth stared, almost dumbfounded, at the sword in his gut, as time stopped. My, that pain was quite exquisite. She seems rather determined. Perhaps this is payback. I never did get around to apologizing to her. Is that why she's mad? No, I can sense a strange power about her more profound than before. I fear that the person you face now is no longer Shay. Then this wasn't planned. She's acting of her own accord. Quite so. Now, go on. I'll rewind the hands of time for you, so defend yourself properly this time. Time backed up, stretching and distorting, and when he opened his eyes again, Shay was glaring at him. I'm here, to end this. My understanding of the divine pulse has slowly been getting better. I can rewind time, perhaps 3 more times. Byleth's eyes narrowed, and Shay darted forwards, her sword strikes painfully slow, just as before. This time, however, he did not allow her any quarter. His mind was much sharper, much more focused. He could see the languidness for what it truly was as a diversion. Aura! He roared, the column of light magic erupting from beneath Shay, and the dark magic fizzled out from her hands. She grit her teeth, raising her arm. Luna! The same maw of dark magic erupted from in front of his, dark eyes peering at him through a void. This time, he knew what to expect. He danced backwards and inhaled softly. There was a flash of purple before him, and Shay appeared in front of him, her eyes wild and manic. Byleth's sword swung out at a dizzyingly quick pace, and her first sword was batted away. The second one raced towards his gut, and he thrust out his hand. Ragnarok! The fire magic caught her in the stomach, and she was blasted backwards. Before her feet even touched the ground, however, she vanished in a flash of purple once more. The battlefield was silent for a long moment. Byleth was tense, his entire body focused for that one sound that indicated her warping. And then, footsteps. Byleth! King Dimitri roared, bursting into the clearing. His stomach dropped. Dimitri, no! Byleth reached out, panicked. There was a flash of purple, and Shay appeared above Dimitri, her swords angled towards his neck. Byleth clenched his hand, and time stopped. Within that limited time, he burst forth, his feet pounding hard across the uneven ground as he raced towards Dimitri. With his grip on the frozen time slipping, he barely managed to bat Shay away before it fell from his grasp entirely. She rolled on the ground, pulling herself up with a huff, and Byleth breathed deeply, feeling the toll of the divine pulse on his body. Behind him, Dimitri startled, realizing that Byleth had, to his eyes, teleported. He whirled around, seeing Shay propping herself up with her swords. "Shay, that's enough. I know of your grudge against the Ashen Demon, but this is no time for it. Please, return to us," Dimitri pled. Byleth stared at Shay as she pulled herself to her feet. "She won't listen. She's out of control. To the contrary, I've never been in more control. Dimitri, kill him. He's a traitor. I found him conspiring with the enemy," she growled, and Byleth stiffened. The Shay that I know would never abandon her allies on the eve of battle to settle a grudge, nor would she raise her blade at me unless necessary. "I am sorry, but I will be bringing you back to us, by force if I must." Dimitri's words were soft, but with a harsh undercurrent to them. They were quiet for a long moment. The wind blew softly in his ears, and Byleth hefted his blade somewhat higher. Shay was the one to break the silence. "You Bladdids have always been trouble. Out of all the beasts, you were always the ones to get in our way the most. Of course the strongest would align with that witch. Lug, Kifon, all of Faerghus, even with Pan's influence, always a problem." Those names meant little to him, but to Dimitri, they apparently meant much. You are certainly not Shay. Then that means you are Epimenides, are you not?" "Welcome to the party, Tempest King, glad you could join us," Epimenides snarked back, and she vanished with a flash of purple. Byleth's sword instantly flashed out, cutting aside a slash. Dimitri moved after a single moment, his lance batting aside Epimenides' second blade with overwhelming force. But then, her blade vanished, and Dimitri was suddenly overextended, and Byleth underprotected. The second blade reappeared in her hands, and with one quick thrust, the blade slammed into Byleth's chest. Time stopped once more, and Suthes stood in front of him once more. "Focus, Byleth. You can't get caught off guard by her techniques just because you're unused to them. One of her blades can vanish and reappear at will. You'll have 2 pulses after this, use them wisely. Remember, regardless of who is currently piloting that body, it's still injured, survive for 10 minutes, and you will be victorious." Time bent and rewound, and Epimenides stared at them loathingly. "Welcome to the party, Tempest King, glad you could join us." This time, when she teleported, he was ready. His sword moved preemptively, slashing down towards where she would be. As she appeared into existence, her swords were forced to defend rather than attack, and judging by the wide-eyed look on her face, she wasn't expecting that either. "Felstar, you truly are as powerful as they say." Byleth's sword erupted with dazzling light magic, and he struck outwards. His sword moved quick as a flash, countless slashes cutting across space itself and forcing Epimenides back. "Prepare yourself." He raised his sword above his head, magic enveloping it and lengthening it dramatically, and when he dropped it, it fell with the strength of 1,000 strikes, and an explosion of power rocked the clearing. Epimenides couldn't guard it fully, blood was dripping down her lip from where she bit it, and her sword held deep cuts in it. Despite that, she remained standing. Byleth's eyes narrowed, keeping his magic on his sword was growing somewhat tiresome. He decided to use what he could while he could. Aura. The spell erupted into 3 columns of light instead of a single one, and Epimenides cried out as she was sent flying backwards. Dimitri approached from behind. "Please refrain from killing her. I understand she attacked first, but she won't die from this. I probably barely hurt her." Byleth responded shortly, raising his sword once more. There was a flash of purple between the two of them, and from behind, Epimenides held a bitter smirk. "You're smarter than you look, Felstar." A hand latched onto him, and a disorienting sensation filled his mind. When it faded, he was standing in an entirely different clearing, somewhere in a different area of the battle. Byleth raised his sword, barely blocking a surprise attack. "Your persistence is admirable. I'll lose that persistence when you lose your life. Now roll over and perish." Her sword raced towards him again, and he prepared to block it, but it fell just short. Hesitantly, Byleth backed up, raising his hand to cast magic, when he saw her. That manic, crazed look in her eyes had faded. She looked tired, incredibly so. Her deep purple eyes held an incredible sadness in them. Please, run while you can. With that, Byleth realized that the person he was speaking to was Shay, not Epimenides. Yes, listen to her. It is tactically the best option to dash. No. Shay stared at him, shock echoing over her features. Even Suthies went quiet. Byleth continued, raising his sword. I won't go until you're back under control. You're in pain. I'll stay until you can confidently look at me and tell me that you've returned to yourself. Tears brimmed in Shay's eyes. You're a fool, you know. I've been called worse. Shay closed her eyes, and when she opened them, it was only Epimenides. Felstar, I'll kill you here. Her voice was deeper as Epimenides, he noted distantly. It held more of a growl. The sound of it repulsed him. It was annoying how far from her normal teasing tone it was. Facing her, as their swords clashed again and again, he found himself wishing he had spoken with her more. The pure hatred that Epimenides showed him, it was such a far cry from the warm smiles that Shay gave. He would have liked to make better friends with the mercenary. They clashed once more, and Byleth forced her back. Ragnarok. The fire magic erupted between them, and space was created once more. The battle was at a standstill for only a single moment when Epimenides warped behind him once more. His sword flashed out, preparing to intercept, but she was gone again before it ever connected. Time and time again, she teleported, swift strikes lashing out at him. Her sword raked across him, thin wounds ripping across his skin moving too quickly for him to react to. A dark storm of energy swirled around him, and Shay appeared in the air, her swords raised. His sword rushed outwards, and he caught both blades on the edge of his own. Epimenides had a grim look set to her face, her teeth grit. Kid. From behind, two horses approached. Byleth grit his teeth, forcing Epimenides' body back, using his greater height and weight to his advantage. With a solid kick to the midsection, he pushed her back, watching her wince. He brandished his sword, and two people were by his side. What's going on here? Everyone's losing their minds over what's happening with you two. You alright, kid? Geralt asked, his lance falling in front of Byleth protectively. From behind, the second horse leapt forwards. We'll take it from here. I can't let the captain's kid fall like this. Leonie charged forth, her hair swaying in the wind. Byleth sighed as she charged forth, wearily downing an elixir, feeling his wounds recover. I'll be fine. It's me she's after. I'm probably the only one who can fight her seriously right now. Even with the divine pulse, she had cut him down twice now. He couldn't just stop time and kill her, for obvious reasons, but... Your old man wasn't known as the Blade Breaker for nothing, you know. I'll help out, so you just sit back and watch. Geralt galloped forth, his horse looking as spirited as the man atop it. And, for what it was worth, the pair did fight very well together. Leonie's fighting style was built around slowly gathering up speed until it was unfeasible to block her attacks. Geralt's fighting style was the opposite, where his was based around breaking the guard of an opponent and slamming into them with unparalleled strength that took time to build. The two complemented each other well, with Leonie leading the charge and Geralt following up with devastating attacks. Byleth got his hits in where he could, but even he could tell that this wouldn't last. Epimenides was growing more and more desperate. Captain, let's go. I'm right there with you, Leonie. Leonie's lance spun above her head as she darted around, slashing at Epimenides again and again. With a toss of the lance, she was sent flying towards Geralt, he was prepared for her. With a twirl of the lance, he tossed it towards Epimenides in a move that clearly mirrored Leonie's, and the resulting explosion of power had Epimenides crying out in pain. Both fighters raced forwards, grabbing the lances of the other, and prepared to continue. And, right as Epimenides took something a bit harsher than a glancing blow, she took her chance. With a swift teleport and another warp, the pair were alone once more, in an isolated part of the battlefield. I won't have anyone interfere. I'll rip out that cursed heart of yours today. She spat, and Byleth's breath hitched. He raised his sword. "What do you know about my heart?" She laughed, the sound low and strangled. "More than you could possibly imagine. I know of that beast that dwells within, the creature you hide from sight. That blank face you show to the world hides your vile nature perfectly, doesn't it, fell star?" He breathed slowly, measuring up Epimenides. She seemed truly enraged. "Suthes is my closest companion. She's not a beast, nor is she someone to hate. I'll protect her, and myself, from you. My apologies for what happens in between." Epimenides reared back, looking genuinely surprised, before roaring out with laughter. "Ha! So the fell star hasn't absorbed you yet? That'll make this all the easier. I am sorry that you've been dragged into this conflict, Byleth, but she's already spoken too much poison in your ear for you to be redeemed." Her dark magic was exquisitely powerful, he noticed, and her eyes were alight with incredible might. She struck out, the pure energy from her slashes crossing far distances. Byleth was on the back foot, forcing himself to defend from distant strikes and a demonically powerful close-range assault as well. Epimenides was practically frothing at the mouth as she forced more and more power out of Shay's battered body. Then, she reared her sword back, and with an infusion of dark magic, she slashed forwards. The titanic swell of dark magic rolled across the clearing, and she moved with it. Dark power swirled between them in a cyclone, the magic striking his skin and cutting him lightly and shallowly. Epimenides leapt into the air, striking downwards with a strong explosion of power that erupted the dark magic around him. With an agonized cry, he barely defended against the worst of it, his sword shaking in his hands. Epimenides hit the ground across from him, starting at him malevolently. She brandished her blades, dark magic swelling within her once more. She rushed forwards, her swords flashing. Before she could reach him, however, an arrow flew right past her, drawing a thin line of blood through her cheek. Cursing, she banked to the side. Byleth met her blades one after another, barely guarding himself from them. Before he found his opening, he slammed his hand down, fire magic erupting between the pair and engulfing his blade in its power. A gale of wind cut between the pair, and Epimenides backed off fully, flourishing her blades. Two familiar faces rushed to his side. "We heard what's happening. We're here to help. I'll back you up, so don't worry and just keep fighting." Annette and Ignatz had come to his aid. Byleth raised his blade resolutely. He was the one to rush forth that time, meeting Epimenides' charge with impunity. From behind, Annette's heavenly voice washed over the battlefield. He wasn't sure if it was mental or magical, but he found himself rallied, his blade work improving, moving quicker and with more strength. Epimenides was on the back foot as his blade, glowing bright with the fire of war, slammed into hers again and again, forcing her back. She made a hasty strike against him, but before he could deflect it, Ignatz's arrow slammed into her blade, sending it veering off course. She glanced back up at him, desperately aiming her blade for his throat. "Nuh-uh." Annette grit her teeth, a massive column of wind erupting around Epimenides. She rushed forwards once the spell ended, twirling Crusher with an incredibly powerful strike that sent her flying backwards with a gasp. Ignatz was prepared for that attack. His bow was already knocked, and he let loose with an explosion of color, 5 arrows becoming one with a rainbow of magic. Magic-infused paint splattered across the ground, coating the terrain and creating a zone of damage for anyone who walked over it. Ignatz gave Annette a running high five, and the pair grinned merrily as they prepared to follow up. Both looked happy until Epimenides appeared in front of them, raising her blade. Byleth's hand clenched outwards. "Divine dash." "No you don't." Epimenides roared. She warped behind him, and her hand slammed on his shoulder. Another dizzying moment later, and he was again in a different part of the battlefield, this time in a closed stronghold, surrounded by Aegir's soldiers. "Kill him!" Epimenides barked out, slashing out towards him, and he was on the back foot once again. From the left, 2 axe users, 1 a flyer. In front, Epimenides, a whirlwind of blades. To the right, an archer and a mage. From behind, a large group of foot soldiers. He had faced worse odds. His sword snaked across the ground in a circle, a smaller circle inlaid among the first. He raised his hand and clenched it, and a massive explosion of magic power poured out from him. Fire exploded outwards, sending his adversaries flying, some of them falling immediately from the force of the blow. His sword fell to his side, and his gaze smoldered as he glared at Epimenides. "Allow me to teach you a lesson." Desperately, Epimenides warped closer, her blades striking out with incredible speed and precision. His blade moved almost languidly, like it was in water compared to hers, but it was enough. His blade slammed into hers with incredible power, and with a single flourish, her primary blade was ripped from her hands. She was pushed backwards with the force of the blow, and he followed up with a solid punch to the face. She staggered backwards, clenching her nose and wincing in pain. Fire smoldered around him, smoke surrounding his figure. His eyes were alight as he glared down at her. A good mercenary can win any fight with numbers on their side. The best can turn the tide of battle with their presence alone. Allow me to show you the power that makes that possible. He clenched his fist, and time froze. The Wyvern Lord went down with a single aura. With no way to defend or prepare for the magic, he was dead within the frozen time before he could even begin to comprehend what was happening. The warrior was cut down with a single slash of his blade, cutting deep into his chest. The archer and warlock went down similarly easily. The foot soldiers were dispersed with a single Ragnarok, the fire erupting in the midst of their ranks and coating them in fire equal to the eternal flames. With the last milliseconds of frozen time, his blade raced towards Epimenides. Time unfroze, and her eyes went wide. She could barely defend herself with her single remaining sword as the entirety of the stronghold fell around her. "You would really cut down your ally like this?" she hissed. "I've cut her down once before. I am not afraid to do so twice," he responded, pressing the blade further. "Byleth!" A voice called out from behind as the doors opened, and Byleth grabbed Epimenides by the wrist, pulling her forwards onto his outstretched knee before pushing her away with a strong kick. From behind, Rodrigue and Monica approached. "Are you all right?" Rodrigue's voice was filled with worry. "I'm fine for now. This battle isn't over yet," he responded shortly. Monica's face was flush with rage as she spoke. "She's using Agarthan magic. I know a thing or two about that. We have your back." Epimenides pulled herself to her feet, downing an elixir. Changing her stance, standing before them was a mortal savant instead of the Azura that faced them previously. "I can handle this, but their support is welcome." Rodrigue moved in tandem with Byleth, supporting him as well as any shield. His well-timed strikes disrupted Epimenides' more frugal, precise fighting style that she'd adopted, and with Monica's dark magic pestering her from afar, it was nigh impossible for her to land a blow. Slowly, they chipped damage onto her. "Monica, with me?" Rodrigue roared. "I won't let you down," she roared back. Fire erupted around Epimenides, drawing her closer, before ice fully encased her. Before it could destabilize, Rodrigue leapt forth, light magic bursting forth from beneath and erupting the ice with its power. With warding magic, Rodrigue held her down, slashing forth with his lance and knocking her back with terrible power. Rodrigue gave Monica a pleased smile. "Well done. You will serve Her Majesty well with that power. I've dedicated all of my training to her. I won't just give up on the fruits of it now." Byleth watched silently. Any moment now. A warping sound came from behind him, and Byleth struck out. His sword met flesh, and his eyes widened. He was staring in the face of a nameless Agarthan soldier. They even looked inconsequential. Another warp came from behind, and before he could move or use his magic, a sword slammed through his back. Time stopped, and Suthies was before him once more. One more rewind. After that, you're on your own. I am already somewhat slipping. Time rewound, its broken records shifting to match his needs, and he opened his eyes. There was a warping sound behind him, and this time, he thrust out with his fist instead of his sword. The Agarthan soldier was sent flying, and when the second warp came from behind, he moved his sword to intercept. This time, instead of meeting his death, Epimenides grabbed him once more to warp. They were alone once more, and Byleth would be lying if he said that he wasn't starting to feel winded. To focus for this long, to stretch his powers this thin, it was difficult. As Suthi's power dwindled, so too did his. "I have to stall. Time is my victory here." What grudge do you hold against Suthes? That monster lauded herself as a goddess, lorded herself over us, demanded our loyalty and our faith, and used her children to punish us when we failed to do so. She's nothing more than a mortal, using her power flippantly and forcing her ideals on others. Thales would say that us Agarthans deserve to preside over all of Fodlan, over all the world. I only seek freedom. Freedom for our people, freedom for all people. I will fight until that freedom is guaranteed, until that false goddess lays dead at my feet and her heart is shattered in my hands. I won't allow you to run free this day, Ashen Demon. His expression hardened. I've always hated that name. To hear it come from your mouth, when we are fighting like this, it reminds me of when we first met. Epimenides paused, staring up at him. Her expression seemed to waver for only a moment, before it was set in a harsh line once more. You can't sway this vessel any further. I'll shut that mouth for good. She flashed forwards, and Byleth was on the defensive. Slowly, he gave her more and more ground, her strikes growing in power and speed. When she wasn't slicing at him in a hurry, she was incorporating dark magic flippantly into her attacks. Whirlwinds of magic buffeted the clearing from their duel, and slowly, damage started to accumulate on both of their bodies. He was knocked back by a swift strike from Epimenides, his body tumbling to the ground. With a sharp roll, he forced himself back to his feet before she could impale him on her blade again. His sword cut forward, slicing through empty air as she teleported again. His eyes darted around, desperately searching for that telltale warping sound. After a long moment, he pulled himself to his feet and got into a ready position. For a long few moments, he stood, hearing only the sounds of his heavy breathing and distant war cries. And then, the sound of a warp. His sword flashed out as he kicked away from the noise. The Knight Captain's sword was remarkably sturdy for surviving all of this. Blade met blade, and his sword was the one to be knocked away. His hand reached out. Aura. Epimenides was as fast as he was. Dark spikes T. Neither could defend from the other, and he cried out as dark magic rippled over his skin, his entire being feeling like it was being flayed. Epimenides sounded equally wounded, and both were sent flying from the force of their magic. His entire body tingled, and his hands clenched uselessly at the ground. Letting out a groan, he blindly fumbled for his sword, slamming it into the ground and pulling himself up slowly with it as a level. Epimenides slowly pulled herself to her feet across from him, her eyes smoldering with hatred. She growled at him, raising her blade once more. I won't lose, not here, not ever. I have to kill you. You'll be the one to die here, Felstar. I'll punish you for all of your misdeeds. Exhausted, Byleth exhaled, raising his sword once more. You aren't the one who holds the responsibility for punishing Suthes. I'll defend both her and myself until the end. And, if she turns out to be evil, then we'll burn together, as demon and devil. Epimenides didn't respond, biting her lip. She raised her sword, dashing in. And from above, a meteor fell. From behind, a songstress entered the battlefield, a teasing smile on her face. I heard things were bad, but I didn't know how bad it really was. Didn't anyone tell you not to hit a woman? To his left, healing magic washed over his body, and he let out a soft sigh as he felt it. Turning, green eyes met green eyes. I think this is a situation where that may be permissible, Dorothea. Flayn said with a small smile. Dorothea giggled softly. To think we'd be fighting together for something like this, well, I can't say I'm all that tore up over it. Come on, Flayn, let's do this. Yes, I am looking forward to it too. The girl beamed up at the songstress. Byleth backed off for a moment, allowing the pair to fight on their own. His body was aching, and he was rapidly running out of steam. He had never fought this hard for this long before. Dorothea and Flayn had incredible synergy. Both were mages, although the former was inclined toward reason and the latter toward faith. Dorothea was capable of pelting Epimenides with magic from a far distance with her liberal usage of meteor, and her songs themselves could create landmines that exploded into magical energy when encroached upon. In contrast, Flayn could heal Dorothea when necessary and keep the pressure on Epimenides, forcing her to fight even harder and focus on her positioning even more, as Flame created zones of light magic that she could conduct a damaging laser through whenever she wished. The battle had shifted from a straightforward sword fight into a tightrope act, where any misstep meant death for Epimenides. Finally, however, Dorothea rose into the air. "Flame, let's end this. I'll give it my best," Dorothea sang, her voice echoing throughout the battlefield, her operatic tune becoming magic in and of itself. That power was inescapable, catching Epimenides before she could properly react, and with a grim look, Dorothea raised her hand. "Forgive me for this one, Shay." Meteor fell from on high, but before they touched down, Flame raced in. With the crest of Cethline flashing, light magic erupted under Epimenides, casting her into the air. With a final burst of magic, an arrow of light came down from on high, slamming Epimenides down and erupting with light magic just as the meteor struck, the two forces melding together perfectly and creating an unrivaled explosion. Epimenides cried out as she was sent flying, and for a long moment, the battlefield was silent. Dorothea frowned, watching Epimenides' limp body. "We didn't go overboard, did we?" Byleth walked forwards, shaking his head. "Epimenides, let's finish this." Flame stared up at him. "Byleth? What are you?" There was the sound of a warp, and Epimenides grabbed onto him, her body beaten and battered. Despite her condition, she was still fighting. They warped once more, and for the final time, Byleth stood across from Epimenides on an empty battlefield. "I won't let you get away, I can't lose, I'll kill you," Epimenides barely managed to slur out, her swords hanging low. He noted the second sword in her hands at some point, she had procured another one. Byleth raised his sword. "There's no more need for words. Come. We'll end this the only way we can." Epimenides gritted her teeth, and she flashed her swords out. "I'll end this quickly." Byleth flourished his blade. No more holding back. For what would be the final time that day, their swords met. Both of them fought with terrifying, incredible power. Epimenides was like a demon set loose upon the world, moving with a swiftness that could not be matched in heaven and earth. Byleth fought like a monster unleashed from the depths of the eternal flames, his every strike enough to fell 30 men. When their blades met, a screeching noise echoed throughout the clearing. Time and time again, time froze, only for Epimenides to weasel out of his strike at the very last moment. Magic buffeted both of them, the two desperately pouring out everything they had in an attempt to kill and survive. She warped frequently, rarely staying on the ground long enough to pivot and actually strike him. He could see her legs shaking every time her feet were stationary. He knew the end was nigh. This battle would be decided very, very soon. Except, he was the first one to make a mistake. One false feint, a straightforward lunge, and he was caught off guard. It was a deceptively slow attack, one that was completely off the tempo she had set. His blade was moving to defend from a strike that would never come. In the end, when she stabbed him once more, his blade was to the side. Time froze, and Suthes stared down at him imperiously from the throne. "Come, now. We're so close to the ending of this. We can't allow this to end this way." Byleth stiffened, and nodded. "No more do-overs. No more resets. From now on, it was as honest as it could get." Time warped and rewound, and he was in the thick of battle once more. When the straight lunge came this time, he was prepared. His blade slipped around hers, wrenching it from her grip once more. He kicked forwards, and she almost hit the ground. Her hand was the only thing that kept her from sprawling out entirely. Slowly, she pulled herself to her feet, and when she stared at him again, it was with a hopelessly enraged expression. She's about to do something stupid, he realized, and he reached out a hand. Before he could take action, however, the clearing trembled as dark magic began to swell, something far larger than anything she had ever put out before. Her eyes flashed red, and she moved her entire body with one fell swoop. Open, the great doors of Hades. The yawning abyss of dark magic opened, and Byleth's hand clenched shut as a divine pulse slammed its hand tight on time. Within that frozen time, he could see the depths of that spell. She had forced some of her own life into it, he realized, all to kill him. It was likely that her time had been shortened by 10 years or more. With all the death on this battlefield, How powerful would that spell be once completed? Gently, a voice wrapped around him. I grow tired of watching you struggle in vain. Come, let us work together. Work together? It's my job to protect you. We are one, Byleth. How many times must I repeat myself before that mortal brain of yours can comprehend it? Now, I will not ask again. Let us work together. Byleth closed his eyes and nodded, and the hands of time began to move once more. His eyes were alight with a green flame, and he spoke. Your will and mine, be now as one. Somewhere, deep within, Suthies and himself were interwoven even more tightly, his soul yearning to accept hers even more closely, and hers in kind. With a bond that close, it was possible for the impossible to occur. Her power and his became as one. Byleth raised his hand. The power of the goddess will create your ending, Epimenides. Come forth, the magic that burns all to destruction. Ania's arrow, burn. That sweltering, all-encompassing flame met the yearning jaws of the underworld, and for a moment, a star erupted on Fodlan. And, like a star that had met the end of its life, it went supernova. The force of the magic, created by the goddess of Fodlan, could not be contained by sacrifice alone. The jaws of Hades were swallowed, consumed underneath the heat of pure power. Epimenides let out her most terrible cry yet as the flame washed over her being, and Byleth stood strong as the spell ended. As the magic dispersed from the clearing, the only thing that remained were two warriors. Epimenides was leaning on her sword, not moving, her entire body frayed and worn. Burns covered her arms, and her entire body had been battered and nearly destroyed. I have become undone, Epimenides gasped out. With that, she collapsed. Byleth breathed in and out slowly, shakily. He almost couldn't believe that he had survived that. Multiple times, he hadn't. Well done, overall. I wish you had been less reckless, but you did well. I'm tired. I'll be taking a nap. Suthies announced to him, yawning. Footsteps came from behind, and Byleth wearily turned to greet them. Claude, Edelgard, and Dimitri regarded him warily. Are you all right? Dimitri was the first to ask, approaching and grabbing him by the shoulder. Byleth leaned forwards, almost collapsing into his arms. Dimitri steadied him, holding him upright. He seems a little tuckered out. Might be best to let the man have a rest, yeah? I mean, Shay once took out our entire year during that mock battle, remember? Can't imagine it was a fun fight even for the Ashen Demon. Edelgard let out a sigh. Focus, Claude. We need to restrain her as soon as possible. Dimitri, take care of the Ashen Demon. Byleth shook his head, standing back up to full. I will be fine. What of the rest of the battle? Dimitri was the one to respond first. A major success. Emperor Aegir has been killed, at Ferdinand's hand. It was his request. Even though some mages from the Agarthans appeared to aid the Emperor, we managed to push them back. We've won this day, and can move on to Garreg Mach soon. He watched idly as Claude tied up Shay. It's good to hear. Thank you for sending assistance. Dimitri tilted his head. Sending assistance? I'm afraid that I did no such thing. If anyone came to aid you, they did so of their own volition. Byleth blinked, craning his neck to look up at the man. Is that so? He wondered aloud. Helping him of their own volition, had anyone ever done that for him aside from his father? The mercenaries in their company were motivated by money and some stringent discipline. The people who hired him only wished to see the job done, all at his own expense. When was the last time? He shook his head, and when he did, dizziness suddenly overwhelmed him, and black spots swarmed over his vision. Dimitri clutched him tightly. Byleth? Are you all right? Answer me. He managed to gasp out. His vision went fully dark, and unconsciousness claimed him. Byleth's eyes fluttered open slowly. A curious pair of eyes were upon him. Oh. You are awake. That girl, Flayn. She was familiar to him, in the same way that Rhea was. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he felt as though he were on the verge of an answer. Just one more vital clue, and he was certain he would be able to pin down that mystery. He wet his lips and spoke. Yes, I am awake. Flame gently raised a water basin to his mouth, and he drank slowly. She helped him sit up, and gave him an encouraging look as he stretched. You should be all right. It seems as though your only ailments are physical and magical exhaustion. You will recover soon. She gave him a kind smile, and Byleth nodded. When can I be discharged? Her expression turned serious. Within the day. However, it is up to my discretion if that time is extended. With that said, walk with me. Byleth blinked, and before he knew it, Flame was hovering around him, helping him slip on his armor. Before long, he was fully dressed in freshly washed clothes, and he was slowly being led out of the tent. What happened with Shay? Flame hummed as they walked along, the camp somewhat busy. She led him down a more hidden path, excluded from the rest of the camp. She is currently detained. I do not know what they are planning to do with her. How long have I been out? Less than an hour. You've recovered far faster than most people would, I must say. Byleth hummed, and their walk continued. As he moved, his body seemed to limber up, his limbs getting back into working order. Their walk led them to an open field, one large enough to walk through easily without going out of sight of the camp. What of the Agarthans? We pushed them back. We're safe for now. Byleth frowned. That didn't seem right. They weren't the type to give up so easily, especially not when their enemy was weakened so much. His eyes went wide. Flame dash. Ah, please, sorry for interrupting, and excuse me for my impertinence, but, have you ever heard of somewhere called Nabatea? Epimenides' eyes opened slowly. She was restrained. That could not be allowed to last. One of the humans noticed her movements and laughed, calling over another human. The latter left the tent quickly. She tested her bonds. Strong. She couldn't break out of them easily. Hey, now, stop struggling so much. Our king is coming, so how about you just sit tight and wait dash. She warped. She had little desire to sit around and wait for that fool of a Bladdid to accost her for information. She summoned her sword and broke through the bonds, testing her feet. Standing would become a problem soon. If she did not act quickly, the cycle of this world would be broken. She closed her eyes and expanded her senses outwards. She was looking for one specific magic signature. There. She warped once more, finding herself behind a rock. She could hear Solan's inane ramblings from behind her. He paused, resting against a rock. She grinned bitterly. Before Solan could react, she rushed forth, her sword flashing out one final time and slamming into his stomach. He choked out, staring at her with complete befuddlement on his face as she activated the magic necessary to summon Zaras. You truly are from Shamhala. Why are you dash? Hush, Solan. I will achieve all of our goals, so you only need to be a sacrifice for me. She twisted her sword, and the dark magical glyph expanded massively as she siphoned all of Solan's life force into it. He groaned decrepitly, and he finally went still. Felstar, may Zaras consume us both. Byleth paused, staring at Flame. Nabatea, that name was achingly familiar. He was tempted to stop and think about it further, but he couldn't. They didn't have time. We don't have time for that. We have to return to camp before dash. Suddenly, without warning or preamble, a large dark magical seal erupted beneath the pair. Flame yelped, fear overwhelming her expression. Byleth. Suthies called frantically, her presence roused from the sudden energy. The magic was already rising. He didn't have time to do much. It was nearly impossible for him to summon even the most meager of divine pulses right now. All he could do was push Flame out of the way. The last thing he saw before the dark magic swallowed him up fully was Flame's horrified face, her hands reaching out to him from just outside of the seal. Check the description for the links to the author.